No? Okay. It's the Planning Committee for Friday the 14th of July, which my paper today tells me is Bastille Day. I don't know whether that's I don't know whether that's auspicious or ominous, but we'll see as we go along. I have received 3 apologies from Matt Butler, Martin Beer and Dermot Murphy. I would like to welcome to the committee, first of all, I'll welcome back Lydia, who was with us a couple of years or 3 years or so ago. I want to welcome back Andrew, actually, because we said goodbye to you 2 meetings ago. And suddenly you're back with us again. I won't ask why that happened. And also 2 new members who are sitting observing, Lee Hartshorn and Bill Hanley. So welcome, and we look forward to hearing your contributions at future meetings. The first item now is the roll call of members present. So would you like to start with that, please?
Thank you, Chair. Members, if you can confirm your attendance and if you've got any declarations of interest, please. Councillor Brady.
I am here, and I've got a few things to go through here, I'm afraid. First of all, on agenda item 5, all of the previous members of the committee, I feel sure, have received communications from Matthew Hinckley and Stephen Buckley on the first item, the Marquis of Granby site. I did also, many years ago, have a conversation on the phone with Matthew Hinckley about this site. That's a personal declaration. On agenda item 6, an email which I'm afraid I haven't received because my computer is down, but I have been handed it. An email has come in to myself, Ken Smith, and Brian, and Lee Hartshorn, although he's not part of the process, in relation to agenda item 6. We'll deal with that when it comes, but it's from the CPRE from South Yorkshire. Agenda item 7, I have received communications from Marcia North and Sandra Poxton, and I have also on occasions met one of the speakers, Professor Crook, who attends parish meetings of one sort or another. So he will be known to, I think, to more than one person around the table. On to agenda item 9, which is the Newby House, Baslow. Jane Newman was a former, who was the agent speaking in this case, is a former employee of this authority. And then from that we go to agenda items 10 and 11, where the National Park Authority is the applicant, and to that extent we have an interest in that. And in relation to agenda item 16, there is an email that has come in from Mrs. Claire Gamble about the Cressbrook site.
15.
What?
15, is it?
Is it 15? Oh, sorry, the 15, item 15, about the Cressbrook site where enforcement action is an issue. I think that completes my lot. So can we carry on with the roll call and see what everybody else is going to come up with?
Thank you. Councillor Chaplin.
Good morning. I can declare in, for item 5, email from Steve Buckley. For item 6, Thornseat Lodge is in the Sheffield City Council area, and I'm here from Sheffield City Council. Item 7, I've received an email from Marcia North. Item 9, I've known Jane Newman for when she was working here for the authority. Items 10 and 11 are applications from the authority. Thank you.
Councillor Hanley, you're here observing only. Councillor Hart.
Present, and the no emails received by me that I can see, as my email is down at the present time. the two applications, obviously, for the Peak Park Authority, and of course, Jane Newman was a former employee here. So that's it, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hartshorn, you're here observing only. Councillor Huddleston.
In attendance and emails for 5 and 7, 15, and also for the applications 10, 11 and 9, no Jane Newman.
Councillor Potter.
Present. I attended Kirby Parish Council meeting on Thursday, but I came out of the meeting before planning was discussed. Jane Newman, I knew her very well as an officer at the National Park, and the National Park has 2 applications in 10 and 11. Thank you.
Councillor Priestley.
Present, the same declarations as the Chair, communications on items 5, 7, 10 and 11 as a member of the Peak District National Park, and 15, and yes, Jane Newman is also known to me. I would also point out on item 5, I previously spoke prior to joining the Planning Committee on behalf of Bamford Parish Council on this item last year.
Councillor Richardson.
Present, the declaration of interest is in 10 and 11. My email's been down, but I won't read all of it.
Miss Slack.
I've got an email from Steve Buckley on item 5, saying as a member of the commercial also Jane Newman as officer, and I have the email from Claire Campbell.
And Mr Smith.
Present, and like other people, 2 emails, agenda item 5, email for agenda item 6, 10 and 11 as National Park applications, email on 15 with regard to Home Farm Sheldon, and Jane Newman, agenda item 9 is known to me on a non-prejudicial basis.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I just supplement mine, because Ken has just mentioned it. I didn't mention we also had an email on Home Farm Sheldon about from Mr Andy Ford, which I think also went to all members. Right, the next item is the minutes of the last meeting. Can I just, before I move these, pick up one small point? On page 8, the minutes of the previous meeting, there was an issue raised at the last meeting as to whether Andrew Hart had asked for his vote to be recorded in relation to, I can't remember what the application was, can you remind me? The farmhouse at Onkert. And we were going to go away and check the records, the visual records as to whether that has happened. Andrew, you're now telling me that you did ask for your name to be recorded on that. So I wonder, I think the best way of dealing with this is for me now to move that these minutes be taken as a correct record, but that I add on to that resolution and that it be noted that at the previous meeting, before last, that declaration, asking for a vote to be recorded did take place. Do you understand the point that I'm trying to get to? Yeah, okay. On that basis, I move those minutes for approval. Can I have them seconded? Those are seconded. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, those minutes are approved. And so we'll now move on to agenda item 6, I think it is. 5, which is the Marquis of Granby at Bramford, application 1222/1563. John, are you introducing this?
I am Chair, alongside my colleague Sarah Welsh, so I'll go first and Sarah will cover further points. Yeah, there are, of course, and members will be aware from the agenda, there are two applications, so we'll do one presentation for for both and highlight the difference between the two. So the title of the applications is the construction to re-establish an L-shaped building including landmark east elevation of former Marquis of Granby to provide 21 open market apartments with associated car parking and landscaping, with financial contribution for off-site affordable housing on one application, and on the other application construction of a separate terrace of 3 affordable houses, both of those with associated car parking and landscaping. So, site location. The wider location is set in the site plan attached to the agenda report in your pack. But on the screen behind me is an aerial image which shows the site location, which is here, which is the site formerly occupied by the Marquis of Granby Hotel, which has now been long demolished, and the extant consent for a hotel redevelopment has started. So you see on this image there's a large excavation and various mounds of rubble from that start of the works. The site sits next to the main road through the Hope Valley. So in this slide, this is the main road with Hathersage Village to the right of the slide. This traffic control signal junction next to the service station, Sickleholme service station, and the road to the north going to Bamford Village, and continuing on to the left towards Hope and Castleton. Next to the application site, you've got the single-storey business premises. As I said, the two-storey garage opposite. You've got the railway station and the Hope Valley Railway line lying there. A bus turnaround, because the site is well served by bus services along this road. Two-storey housing to the northwest, and the River Derwent, which is also a site of special scientific interest, bounding the site to the south. As a result of the river, a large portion of the site is within flood zones 2 and 3, which concentrated development in this case and in the previous approval to the northwest part of the site, which is outside of those zones. Move on to the next slide. This just shows the nature of the work that's undertaken. It's a topographic survey. There's a large excavation you'll see in the photographs from the start of the former hotel development, and these are the spoil heaps, or the graded material ready for reuse in that former development. You've already got in place right turn harbingers into what was going to be the main access into the previous hotel development. That's been put in. You have a lay-by here, and this would form, and we'll see in the plans, the main entrance for the proposed development. There is a secondary access via another sort of lay-by just west of the traffic junction into the side, and there's the adjoining business premises. So just going through a few slides now to show the context. So this is looking with Hathersage Village behind towards the Sickleholme service station there. This is the highway lay-by, and the main access into the site is just there. So you can see the business premise in the distance, and these stored materials as part of the former redevelopment. And you can see the right turn harbinging the road already in place there. Just a little bit closer. And as you move closer towards the junction, most of the site is screened by the head. Further on, you'll see in the next slide a 1.8 metre high wall which was constructed as part of the previous development. This is looking down from the road up to Bamford. The village is behind the viewer in this slide. Sickleholme service station is on the right hand side, and this is the 1.8 metre high wall. And behind that, these trees here line the riverbank, a key landscape feature, and you can just see the top of the business premises to the right hand side there. So this is the main development site you'll see in the detailed drawings. Just a little bit further back, just to show how the site sits in the wider locality. And then this slide is taken looking across the adjoining business premises. So this is the application site beyond this wall. This is the secondary access off this former lay-by into the corner of the site, with the service station to the left. And then a few slides looking over the wall from the business premise. So this is the large excavation currently on the site, and the stored various graded spoil or topsoil for reuse, the roadside wall, and then the riverbank trees to the right there. There's a few more slides showing that, the condition of the site in it at the moment. As I say, the development stalled because of market conditions, but the planning consent for the hotel is still extant. And then looking back across the site from within it. So, the proposal is for the construction of the L-shaped building, which is here, a range of 3-storey buildings in 4 blocks to accommodate 21 market apartments in one scheme, and 21 market apartments, and I'll show the slide with 3 affordable houses in the second scheme. And just to remind members, in one of the applications, along with the 21 market apartments, is the offer of £100,000 contribution towards off-site provision of affordable housing. So the apartments would be a mix of 15 2-bed apartments and 6 3-bed apartments arranged in these blocks. Car parking, 50 spaces between the roadside wall and tucked down behind that, between the apartment block and the roadside wall. Communal gardens to the south, with a buffer between the river and the shared gardens. The land to the east, all this land here, would become improved grassland with wildflower meadows for biodiversity value, and some additional planting, woodland planting at the far east of the site. The existing access from the former hotel development will be reused for this, with an access road coming down through the woodland, through the grassland rather, to the development site. That's the one scheme. The other scheme shows the position of the 3 affordable houses. So these would be just to the east of the main apartment block, and would have their own parking space, 6 spaces, and planting to integrate it into the development and separate it from the rest of the grassland proposal. I should say as well, as we zoom into these, is that this section, there's 4 separate blocks, but this eastern block, and we'll see in the elevations, is the recreated former Marquis of Granby building. And again, this just shows a little bit more detail, the communal garden, the arrangement of the parking, where there'll be accessible spaces, and the secondary access, which would be confined to delivery and service vehicles or emergency vehicles, along with an accessible pedestrian access, but the main access would be out to the east. And just a zoomed-in version of the second application with the 3 affordable houses located here with their own dedicated parking and bin storage opposite. That's superseded one, so I won't dwell on that one. These are just a couple of slides showing in more detail the landscape creation of the habitat to the east of the site in more detail. So you won't be able to read the detail, but there is significant enhanced biodiversity in terms of the grassland and the woodland habitat that would be created in that area, along with the new landscaping in the form of tree planting along the frontage, around the development itself, and the protection of the riverbank trees. That's a former one. So this just shows the access in more detail. I won't dwell on that, but it's already formed. There would be a gated access into the site, and timber post and rail fencing separating the driveway off from the grassland area. You can see the right turn harbage already in place there. And the secondary access, which we've already spoken about. So in terms of the floor plans of the apartment blocks, there is a basement which provides for individual storage units for each of the apartments. And you can see a little bit more detail about the communal garden area there and the initial parking. That's a basement plan, and then above that you have 3 floors of the apartments. They range in size from 90 to 158 square metres, I think, yeah, the floor space of the apartments. And as I said before, there's 4 blocks, each connected by these lift and stairwells, dividing them up. And the right-hand side here is the recreated Marquis of Granby building. Key feature of the southern apartments are these balconies on those apartments. Each of those have a balcony each, whereas on the western elevation they have Juliet balconies. So I won't dwell on the floor plans too much because you won't be able to see the detail, but as I said, mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. And the roof plan shows the recreated Marquis building and the concealed plant areas behind the roofs where the air source heat pumps and other plant would be tucked away from view. So in terms of the detail elevations, this is the elevation to the main road. So on the left hand side you've got the recreated Marquis of Granby building, these link structures, and these are the four separate blocks. So you've got the single-storey business premises to the right and the garages behind you here in this view. The materials would be natural stone, blue slate roofs, and would be timber windows and doors in the blocks themselves, with aluminium windows in the intervening connecting link blocks. This isn't really a true elevation because, as you'll notice from the slides, there is that boundary wall and there is a slight drop in levels between the road and the site. So this includes the current 1.8 metre high boundary wall and gives an indication of the landscaping which would soften this appearance from the public view from the road coming down from Bamford. This is the view from the Hathersage looking towards the Sickleholme Junction. So you can see this is the recreated Marquis of Granby building. In this view, this elevation, you'll note from the plans, is set well back. So this would be the dominant element coming from this direction. And along with the landscaping come to fruition there. The roads, the southerly elevation facing down towards the river. You can see here the balconies I spoke about earlier, these connecting blocks, and I said Juliet balconies on the left-hand side here. So there's large areas of glazing on this relatively private side facing the river and the riverside trees. And again with the trees superimposed and the landscaping around the communal garden there. This is the elevation from the looking towards the junction with Hope and Caston behind you. So looking over the frontage of the adjoining business premises. So these would be Juliet balconies, the main road to the left there. I think from this elevation it'd be particularly prominent looking across that open frontage. And then with the wall that's been already constructed and the secondary access down into the site there. So before going on to that, cover the stone. Yeah, so I'll just go back to this slide. So just talking a bit about the recreated Marquis of Granby building. Whilst we do welcome the 3-storey element in the design, recreating the former Marquis of Granby element as a focal point in the design, the overall scale of the development is not acceptable at 3-storey, which runs all the way behind that along the frontage. Let's go back to that slide. The former Marcus Hotel was developed historically, as we set out in the report, from a former farmhouse which sat in the river valley, and the scale of the former three-storey element was tempered somewhat by the two-storey and single-storey development which flowed from the rear of that, reducing the overall scale of development. In that river valley, three-storey buildings are rare. Most development is small, isolated farmsteads with main development concentrated in the villages on the higher ground away from that river valley. So the amount of development in that sort of landscape is limited and generally small scale and two-storey in height. There's no established tradition for three-storey housing in that valley or indeed elsewhere in the park. Occasionally you get three-storey mills, but they are occasionally very defined locations, and even more occasionally you get within the centre of some of our larger villages a few three-storey housing buildings as focal points within a village. So the overall character of the built environment, and particularly housing in the national park, is two-storey development. So in this case, the overall scale of this development at three-storey, the scale and massing of that is significantly at odds with the local building tradition, and from as set out in our report, would cause harm, significant harm, to the character of the landscape and the built environment in the river valley in this particular location. So just move on from that to the affordables, because these are the proposed affordables. A terrace of 3 at 70 square metres floor space, so they are of an affordable size. They are 2 bedrooms. They are being offered as part of them for shared ownership, with the occupiers eventually being able to staircase out to full ownership. They would be constructed of stone, blue slate roofs to an acceptable design, timber windows and doors there, very, very reflective of the local tradition for two-storey housing and picking up traditional details of chimneys, etc. Gables, simple gables, and solar panels on the rear to help energy costs, and gardens facing south. So these are some CGI images of how the development would look over time from the vantage points that we've seen already in the photograph. So this is looking towards the junction. You've got the main access here, the extended hedge, intervening landscape, and this would be the Marquis of Granby building and the back end of the L there, just sticking out there, Bamford Garage there, Shitlam Garage. And as you move closer, the 3-storey main building comes more into view. And as you look down with Bamford Village behind you, looking down towards the junction, the development there, and the Bamford Garage to the right-hand side. And just as you approach the junction in more detail. And from the western side, as you're approaching the junction, the business unit is to the right-hand side. This is very open, where the scale and massing of these buildings would be particularly noticeable and dominant upon the adjoining buildings and the viewer's eye point from this position. And then further back, with the intervening buildings landscaping beginning to foil it. So at that point, I've covered the design and the layout, etc. So I'll hand over to my colleague Sarah Welsh, who'll talk more about the policy and viability aspects of the application.
Thanks, John. The intent of the local plan through policies GSP 1, 2, 3, DS1, HC1, L1 is to achieve effective conservation enhancement and to respond to local need for affordable housing that can remain affordable in perpetuity. The spatial strategy of the local plan directs development towards named settlements through policies DS1 and HC1, and Bamford is a named settlement. At Planning Committee last February, members assessed a similar planning application at this site and made a judgment that the site has a relationship with the village of Bamford. In making the judgment that the site has this relationship, members took into account the site's location close to the petrol station and shop opposite, the train station and bus stop, all key services that serve the village of Bamford. This judgment is a material consideration. It's also important to note that officers and a registered provider have worked with Bamford Parish Council to find a suitable site for affordable housing, and nothing has come forward. As a national park, there's no requirement to deliver market housing. It is clearly stated in the first sentence of Policy HC1 that provision will not be made for housing solely to meet open market need. There are circumstances where the principle of housing is acceptable, subject to other issues, including landscape, and in this case, public interest, which I'll come on to in a bit. Policy HC1 Part C allows in principle new housing in order to achieve conservation or enhancement in named settlements, and in doing so must address identified eligible local need and be affordable for local people in perpetuity, unless it is not financially viable, although the intention is still to maximise the proportion of affordable homes. The application focuses on the need to enhance the site and seeks to do this through a large-scale market housing development. The applicant has submitted a financial viability appraisal to demonstrate that to be viable, it can afford to offer 3 affordable dwellings or £100,000 off-site contribution. Or recently, we've been offered £30,000 per plot for the 3 plots.
Sorry,
There's an author.
It's £10,000 per plot.
Sorry, £10,000 per plot for the 3 plots. Okay. We appointed a consultant to carry out an independent review of the financial viability appraisal, and they considered the development could achieve more affordable housing on site and still be viable. It's for the local planning authority to determine the amount of weight we give a financial viability appraisal, and given the conclusion of our consultant came to, we recommend members give less weight to the conclusions of the applicant's viability appraisal. The development is also considered to be major development in the national park. This is based on the number of units proposed, together with the size and design of the development and its impact on the surrounding area. The MPPF in Para 177 states that planning permission should be refused for major development in a national park other than in exceptional circumstances and where it can be demonstrated that the development is in the public interest. It requires the development to be assessed for the need for the development, including any national considerations and the impact of permitting or refusing it on the local economy, the cost of and scope for developing outside the national park or meeting the need for it in some other way, and any detrimental effect on the environment, landscape and recreational opportunities, and the extent to which that can be moderated. The officer's report sets out the reasons for why the development would fail this assessment and why it is not in the public interest to approve the development proposed. In summary, there would be no long-lasting impact on the local economy that could justify the development. The development of 21 market apartments and 3 affordable houses that do not remain affordable in perpetuity are not needed and could be developed outside of the national park. The development is not of an appropriate scale and design that would enhance the site and fails to take into account the landscape character it sits in or development in the area that contributes to good local character. So based on the issues that John and I have raised, we recommend members refuse the 2 applications for the reasons set out in the handout that you've got.
Thank you. I have 2 speakers. They're going to go in reverse order, I gather. So I'm going to ask Mr. Steve Buckley if he would address us first. Because there are 2 applications here, I think the two speakers between them have got 6 minutes instead of the usual 3. But we're not going to because it's a very important application. We're not going to be too worried about how long each of them speaks for between them. Right, Mr. Buckley, would you like to say what you have to say, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. My name's Steve Buckley. I'm planning agent on the application. I'll speak first before handing over to Matthew Hinckley, who's the applicant. The application is, on the face of it, complex, with much detailed information having been provided, especially in regard to financial viability. However, in a nutshell, the only real concern throughout post-submission discussions has been the level of affordable housing and whether this level is sufficient to justify approving the scheme. If we reach an acceptable level, then this application would be considered to also be in the public interest, as demonstrated in several recent decisions by both committee and the Planning Inspectorate, such as at Dove Dairy and Newborough. The officer's report sets out that the policy requirement is 10%, but seeks that this level is maximised subject to financial viability. Our scheme delivers 3 out of 24 units to be affordable, hence 13% affordable housing set against a 10% target. Therefore, the scheme complies with the policy requirement. However, the area of dispute is the element of maximisation over and above this level, which is down to financial viability. Our application is supported by a detailed financial viability assessment prepared by Peter Milner, a local surveyor who's the authority's usual go-to consultant for viability work. We consider this as a fair assessment of what the scheme can deliver. We've also offered members delegated powers to offer 3 additional plots to be sold to affordable housing provider at a price of £30,000. By contrast, officers advised by Porter Economics from Devon have considered the scheme could support more, 5 in a scheme of 26, so 19%. The area of dispute is the financial viability elements. We consider we've raised several faults in the local authority's document. We don't feel these have been considered and updated by officers or Porter Economics, which is why we've tried to provide evidence to members to allow them to form their own opinions. Therefore, in policy, we're over affordable housing requirements, but the dispute appears to lie between 13 or 19%. Set against this, however, there's been no provision of affordable housing in the High Peak area of the National Park for 10 years, and the officer's report acknowledges that there's little scope for any other sites to come forward. Furthermore, other affordable housing schemes which have been approved include Newborough, which delivered 11%, and also Dove Dairy, which delivered 15%. All of these financial viability sites appear to deliver in the range we're talking now. As the Inspector's decision on Dove Dairy indicated, the provision of affordable housing within the National Park, where there's a large shortfall and no sites likely to come forward, represents exceptional circumstances in accordance with GSP 1 to allow new housing in order to achieve the conservation and enhancement of a settlement. Accordingly, the first and second reasons for refusal can be removed should members determine that the level of affordable housing proposed is the maximum which can be viably delivered. Thank you. I'll pass over to Matthew, if that's all right.
Thank you, Chair. I am Matthew Hinckley, the applicant. The February 2022 committee concluded that the site was in Bamford and the most sustainable site for housing of any sort in the National Park due to its close proximity to public transport and opposite the only shop in Bamford, and that the inclusion of affordable housing makes it an exception site. DS1 was not regarded as a reason for refusal. The committee requested an application that included the Old Marquis, some affordable homes and the roadside elevation to be less blockish. We have achieved that after 4 meetings with John Keeley, of which Brian Taylor attended 2. The roofline above the stair and lift course has been reduced. The inclusion of 2 gables within the roof of the central building is in keeping with the character of the National Park. The solid glazed sections within the stair course have been removed. The safety railings can be replaced with safety glass should that be preferred. On the 10th of May, Mrs Welsh advised she would recommend that the application for 3 affordable homes be increased to 5. Recommend refusal for the application with a £100,000 off-site contribution of 3 affordable plots. She did not criticise the design and character of the roadside elevation. The public has not objected to the design, but recently the officers have changed their minds about the roadside elevation despite their previous agreement to it. During a pre-app meeting, Brian Taylor stated that shared ownership was as important as affordable rent. PPE's reappraisal viability statements are Test A for 3 affordable homes and Test B for 5 affordable homes. Test B confirms in the top right-hand corner in orange that affordables are marginally viable, but that includes the margin that does not exist. Test B for five affordable homes is therefore flawed. An example of why Section 610 of PPE's report confirms its agreement to the apartment build cost of £1,815 per square metre, but it uses £1,755 a square metre in order to inflate the margin for 5 homes. PPE's strategy to confuse has been exposed with my email to members on the 3rd of July and this presentation. Officers are aware that PPE's report is flawed, yet they rely upon it to justify refusal of our application. Also, the officers' statements on pages 50 to 55 comparing Milner Commercial and PPE are not correct, but 3 minutes is not long enough to explain. How can the Marquis roadside elevation for 5 affordable homes be acceptable, but 3 is not acceptable? I hope you will take the opportunity to grant this application.
Right. Well, Chairman, members, members, this is a somewhat complex situation, as I'm sure you'll all appreciate. Can I just start off with something that Mr. Hinckley said? And I'm afraid I didn't fully understand the point, but you'll be able to pick it up. He said that some consideration in certain pages of your report were flawed and officers were aware of it. Are you able to respond to that?
I said PPE report was flawed.
The PPE report was flawed. And okay, fine, I don't know what the PPE report is, but...
BPE gave us a technical report on the differences between the applicant's financial viability appraisal and the review that was done. There are areas that they have not come to agreement on. In this case, we've decided to, you know, we've paid for the advice and again give it less weight, basically.
So I'm trying to work out whether there's an awareness of something being flawed, or whether there's simply a difference of professional opinion about what these figures are.
I'm not aware that it's flawed. I think there's a difference of opinion.
There's a difference
and the applicant has submitted further information since the review was done. But the point of a financial viability review is to be upfront and be transparent from the beginning. Then we carry out a review. So then submitting further information down the line makes it quite difficult.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now, the thing I'm struggling with a little bit on this is where we start in policy terms. We have a very clear policy, which is quite unusual, really, when you think about it. But we do have one clear policy, which is that in your building new housing development, it has to be affordable. All new housing development is affordable unless it can an open market housing development can be justified on one of 2 grounds. The first one of which is that it's going to achieve a significant environmental improvement for the national park, which is, for example, what will have happened at Newborough in Bradwell. The second one is because the open market housing development is enabling affordable houses. It has to enable affordable houses. And what seems to me to be happening here, and this is one of the reasons I'm struggling a little bit with the report and the line of argument that's going on here, is that we're sort of arguing it the other way around, and we're trying to put in affordable houses to try and enable the open market development. Now, if this site is appropriate for affordable houses, I'm going to guess, and I don't know whether this is right or not, that there's more than one way of providing affordable houses on this site. If this is the only way of providing them, then an argument might be made the way we've been hearing about. But the justification comes by saying, if we're going to put affordable housing on this site, what is necessary to enable it to happen? And that seems to me to be an argument that I have not seen in this report or heard round this table so far. Have I got that right? Is that the sort of gist of the situation? Yeah, okay. Members, anybody got any thoughts on this? I don't see lots of hands going up. I've got Ken Richardson, Ken Smith and Mike Chaplin.
Yeah, my question is, I can see the vision there, but what's that in relation to the approved building which can be built? Because I've seen photos of the older building, but what was approved on site, is it the same mass? Because that's already been approved and could be built.
Have you got that question? Yeah.
Yes, it's very, very similar mass, but that was a wholly different development for a hotel. It wasn't housing, and it was at a different time.
Sorry, that's
Yeah.
not correct. The extant permission is twice the size of this, plus there's a huge single-storey level. So to say it is the same massing as the extant permission one, you know, is not true.
Comparing with what we see here, this element.
It is not true.
I tell you what, Mr. Hinckley, would you like to come and take back your seat back there again? And then when I call upon you to speak, you by all means indicate. When I call upon you to speak, you can speak, but please don't interrupt. Sorry, you've answered that question. Are you happy with the answer to that question? Right, okay. I've now got Ken Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I was just pointing to Ken wanting to speak in reality, but since you've given me the opportunity, just clarification at one point for the moment, and that's to do with the affordable housing, because it seems to me that the what is being proposed is either the £100,000 contribution, which would probably buy a room or two in a local house, or housing which would only be affordable to the first buyer, and that ratcheting then that would enable those people, that purchaser, to purchase that property, and it then becomes not affordable property. So we aren't talking about affordable housing in perpetuity.
Okay, I'll come back to you. And I've got Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed that paragraphs 274, 275 and 276 on page 47 bring out the point that you've got two communities. I mean, Bamford is the one that's being given prominence, but also Hathersage, which is also nearby. Both have high demand for affordable housing, and it does seem to me that this application the application clearly does not address that, because there is the ratio of market housing to affordable housing seems to me to be the wrong way around. But in a way, our planning officers have unfortunately been drawn down that path by the nature of repeated applications coming forward, because originally there was an application, as I understand it, for commercial build, where a new hotel would go on that site, which meets a different need, which we have built into our policies for the kind of development that's acceptable in the national park. But I'm very much in agreement with you, Chair, that really we've got the cart before the horse here, and that we should be giving more prominence to affordable needs housing. And there's, in my view, this application does not address that.
Thank you, Mike. Any other members? Can I just come back to the scale and massing point? Because it could be argued that if we were happy with the three-storey hotel on this site, it doesn't really make much difference in terms of the landscape or townscape impact of the development as between a hotel and flats. So what is the issue there? I'm not talking about the use here. I'm not housing versus hotels or housing, affordable housing versus non-affordable housing. I'm just talking about the physical appearance of a development in the landscape. If they're, I mean, we don't know because we haven't got the plans in front of us what the approved plans said. But as between the two sorts of development, why does it matter that one of them has to be two-storey and the other one can be three-storey?
Well, you said leaving aside the use, which is a critical point of your question. In purely massing terms, there isn't a huge amount of difference between the two. Elevationally, they're quite different and they have a different appearance. This is clearly housing, and the hotel development by its very design was clearly of a different nature and clearly looked like a hotel. So it had a different impact on the landscape, although the scale and massing on the roadside frontage was broadly similar. A lot of the massing of the hotel was behind the roadside frontage, and as Mr Hinckley says, stretching out towards how this is a single story. But they are different animals and were approved under different policies.
Brian, help us with that.
Well, I was just thinking the hotel development was still a large development in the national park. It wasn't in itself an easy decision to make about that scale. I think what we're looking at was the overall balance that use of a hotel brought to the economy and the local community in that area. So the planning balance question was different at that time. So yes, you've actually got a material permission in place, haven't you, of a scale, but actually that was balanced with the use and benefits that brought. So I think you have to remember that point. We're dealing with a different combination of things now.
Was the old hotel still standing then? Were you comparing old hotel with new hotel? Or, I mean, we've got a blank site here, and what we're saying here is just simply you can't have three stories here because there's too much three-storey. I'm not quite getting that argument. This is purely about visual issues. If you're saying that the previous one was unacceptable, there might be an argument to be made about that. But if the previous one was acceptable at 3 stories, why isn't this one acceptable at 3 stories?
I was saying it was permitted on balance with everything that gave. It wasn't just permitted because of its shape. It was permitted for what it brought to that area as well.
But when you put in the, I see. Okay, I understand the argument you're making. I'm not sure that I've necessarily.
Second purpose of the national park is to enjoy the national park. So that had a different benefit to market housing.
Okay. Any other members wish to talk on this so far? Mr. Hinckley, can you just briefly make the point you want to make?
Well, first of all, there would be a section 106 with the agreement, so it would be in perpetuity, it would be affordable housing. It's also been referred to in paragraph 9 of Mr. Butcher's report to you. And the shared ownership model is in accordance with Homes England that we put forward, and it would be in perpetuity. The second thing which members need to be aware of, and that this site has planning approval for 44 non-permanent residential apartments. 44. This is 21. I can assure you, if you look at the old plans, it's twice the size of this and a huge single-storey area to the left. I would also like to correct Mr. Taylor's comment that when that approval was given for the 3-storey building, the existing Marquis of Granby was still there. Yeah. And therefore the decision on 3 stories was given against what was there. So I suppose the real question is this. If you decide to refuse this application, and I come back with the same application for non-permanent residential apartments of 21, no affordable housing can be justified. With a small restaurant, you would be able to refuse it, because use is there, sizes, it'd be smaller, and that's the one option. So, and they had Juliet balconies, they had 126 car parking spaces, and basically non-permanent residential apartments can be owned by anybody, and there's no tenure. So they could actually own these apartments, even though there's a small hotel with it, but actually just use those apartments themselves. So I think members need to be aware of the wide-ranging implications for the extant permission, that actually it could be owned by 44 individual people who use it, because no restriction on time for 11 months of the year, provided it's not their permanent residential location, i.e. where their tax return goes to. The current permission allows for long-term use throughout the year. So I would urge you, the financial viability, and people saying it's the wrong way around. In order to determine financial viability, it is government guidelines that there's so much affordable home has to be able to build and fund, so much open market has to fund affordable homes. Hence why financial viability assessment's done, and it refers to the RICS costs and BICS, right? Peter Milner, who you have relied on in the past, who has got exceptional integrity, who understands this site, has come up with a very good report. We've identified that PPE, who, based in Devon, didn't even visit the site, and it is flawed. So, going back to it, you've got an opportunity to have 3 affordable homes, or you've got an opportunity for me to come back with 21 non-permanent residential apartments with the same use, with a little bit of a hotel, or I go to appeal, and I can do all 2. So that's the facts of life. I'm sorry to spell it out so bluntly.
Well, I think you've made your point very clear. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. I will ask you one question, which is, what do you think the exceptional circumstance is that justifies a major open market housing development in this location?
Well, first of all, we are re-establishing the Marquis of Granby, and as a 3-storey building. We are putting in the affordable homes. In the rest of the building is very much in keeping with the tradition of the Peak Park, and it is stone built. There's a file note on Peak Park's planning records of the 5th of May 2006, where they describe this location as semi-rural. It improves the entranceway to the Hope Valley. At the moment, you've got ugly traffic lights where everybody looks at the petrol station. You come down the Hathersage Road, which you saw, and you would see the 3-storey Marquis of Granby building, which has always been known as a landmark, not landscape, a landmark. When you look at this this view here, you see it for around about 10 seconds, because you drive down, turn left or right, and you don't see it. If the lights are on, yes, you see it, but nobody really, hardly see it. You come from the Hope Road, again, you hardly see it. What wasn't mentioned to you, and that is what was described as a single-storey building on the right-hand side is in fact a 2-storey. If you go inside, there is a second floor. It's a very tall building.
I've asked you a specific question. You're going on beyond that.
Sorry.
Okay,
it improves the landmark of the Hope Valley.
I hear what you have to say. Thank you very much. I'd be very grateful if you could resume your seat now. Brian just wants to make 2 points, and then we'll move on from there.
Thank you. Yeah. In terms of the the 3 affordable homes that are set out, we've had information to say that they would be in a shared ownership model that could be staircased out of, so that could be fully owned. Firstly, that doesn't really comply with our housing policy, which refers to homes in perpetuity. If they're staircased out, they're lost. If they're taken through a registered provider, we would expect the 106 agreement to use that language of in perpetuity so that it's permanently capped and can't be staircased out under our policies. In perpetuity, that's our understanding and meaning. I'm talking about the application of our development plan.
That's not helpful, I'm sorry.
The intervention of a development plan is to achieve local outcomes for the national park, and in that sense we're talking about our purposes and our duty to the local communities. So that's one thing. We would expect those to be available to the local community in perpetuity. We also have said, that we don't think that kind of level of housing provision would address the acute housing needs of this area, of the local communities in the valley, Bamford and Hathersage to some degree. So that's one thing. We're not comfortable with the provision on the table in terms of addressing local housing needs. The other point about the nature of hotel form of development is that we'd obviously have to apply that against current policies. The development management policies have come about since that last development, and we would definitely apply conditions to set out 28 days of occupation. So I don't think you can assume that we would have long residence in a development like that. We would be looking to contain that for holiday occupation.
Okay, thank you very much. Ken Smith, and then I'm going to bring this to a close shortly.
Thank you, Chair. Brian's made a number of points that I was going to try to establish. And it was one of them was the reasoning behind my seeking clarification on the nature of the affordability and perpetuity of these affordable houses, because it does seem to me that what is being proposed isn't going to meet the needs of the local communities and the significant need for affordable housing. Unless I've got completely the wrong end of the stick, the previously refused application was to do with design and elements of that, but it was also to meet members' desire to see the provision of affordable housing, and because that wasn't included in that application. What we have in front of us seems to me to be a kind of bolt-on response to our request for provision of affordable housing, even if it is only 3. It looks, to use Mike's phrase from earlier on, as if we're establishing 2 communities. We have one in the block and then 3 more sets in a kind of ghettoed area adjacent to it. And that doesn't seem to me to be integrating into the development appropriately the provision of affordable housing. Now, members' opinion last time, and the reason for refusal was that there wasn't affordable housing. Officers' opinion now is that while there's been some provision, it is not sufficiently adequate for the needs of the local communities, and it seems to me, and members can form their own opinions, that it is not integrated into the overall development, that it is a bolt-on, it's an afterthought to meet something that has been demanded. And I think that what we have before us is a reasoning for refusal in that what is being proposed is inadequate. And I don't think that representing alternative options in the way that has been, which could be construed as threats, as a gun to the head of the planning committee, is an appropriate way to resolve the issues that are before us. And I think on that basis, Chair, I'd be happy to move the recommendation.
Well, I'm very grateful to you for that, because it saves me probably doing the same thing. May I just make 1 or 2 suggestions about the reasons for refusal? I think it should be made clear in reason 1 that we're not objecting to proposed housing development or even major housing development. We're talking about the amount of open market housing development. And I think those words ought to be included in reason 1. I think reason 2 should make it clear that our priority is the provision of affordable houses, and that doesn't, I don't think, come out very well in the wording. And we will put together wording with the officers to make it clear that the starting point is policy HC1 and the need for affordable housing. And I think 3 does need to refer to the quality of the building, the size and massing of the buildings, rather than landscape, because it is about townscape, the visual townscape. Are you happy with those approaches? On that basis, I'm happy to second it. Would you? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was offering to second it, but you beat me
Michael,
to it.
I'm sorry. I will try to keep my mouth shut. Has anybody got any further comments to make on that? On that basis, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour of... there are 2 votes. Well, actually, there are 2 applications, but there's 1 recommendation. Am I voting on 1 recommendation or 2 recommendations? I think the...
We'd have to take them one at a time.
Right, well, let's deal with application 122 01543. All those in favour of refusal? Those against? That is carried unanimously. And application 122 01563. All those in favour of refusal? Those against? That is carried. We will now move on. Would members like a 5-minute break? So we say at about 8 minutes past, we'll be back here. Thank you very much. Right, members, we're reconvening, and the next item on the agenda is Thornseat Lodge at Sheffield. John, would you briefly please introduce this?
Yes, I'll be very brief because members know all about this when it was deferred from the June meeting for officers to discuss with applicants and their agent heads of terms for the Section 106 and the conditions appropriate for the development as they were minded to approve. We've done that. We've shared the heads of terms and the conditions with the applicant and their agent, and they've indicated that they are in acceptance of those terms. So other than that, I'll hand it back to the committee chair to discuss anything further.
Thank you. I should report that I've one or two of us have had an email from CPRE Podski, it seems to say. What does that mean? Peak District in South Yorkshire, right. It expresses concerns about the decision that was made at the last meeting. They raised two particular issues, which I'm telling you now so the applicant and his supporter can deal with it if they wish to. One of them is about how will the noise management plan be enforced, and the other one is concerned about the car park and what happens on days when it might overflow, given that you might have an excess of visitors for particular events and so on. So we've got two speakers. I've got Rachel Woodhouse-Haig and Mark Boyd. Are you going in that order? You're Mark Boyd, I presume.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. As most of you in attendance today will be aware, last month's deferral of the application was predicated on the majority position of the members to support the proposals to restore Thornseat Lodge, subject to the agreement of conditions and heads of terms. I'm happy to confirm, as John has said, that the applicant has agreed to both the conditions that you have before you and the heads of terms of the legal agreement. The applicant was encouraged by the vocal support in the June committee meeting, notwithstanding the clear and keen support for the application. We acknowledge that there were a small number of concerns to which the following supplementary comments are offered. Insofar as traffic impact, it's just reiterated that the existing operations at the applicant's nearby wedding venues are representative of the estimated movements to be associated with the lodge and are consistent with current traffic movements in the area. Furthermore, the proposed restoration would relocate these existing wedding businesses rather than constitute an additional business with additional impact, should provide further comfort that there would be no material or severe impact on the local highway network. Just to briefly touch on the CPRE email, just to confirm that the applicant is steadfastly committed to implementing and upholding the recommended mitigation measures that were recommended in the adopted habitats regulation assessment, which would seek to uphold the landscape character of the locality and preserve local habitats, whilst also, in doing so, achieving the viable restoration of this at-risk heritage asset, reviving and revealing its rich cultural history within the Peak District. So, pursuant to salvaging Thornseat Lodge, we respectfully ask members to carry forward the positive momentum from your previous meeting and approve the application before you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now have Rachel Woodhouse-Haig.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I've come before most of you before on this application, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you to the officers for drafting those conditions quite quickly so that we could get back before you on this committee meeting before the summer. There were just a couple of things that were mentioned during the last meeting, and I just wanted to expand on them. I think there was issues with whether the viability of other options had not been sufficiently explored, and I just wanted to reiterate that this asset, the business plan and model that we've created is to keep the asset within the family, to use the term in perpetuity, if my grandchildren can still be doing that. And whereas as a single home, none of us would be living in a single home, and we wouldn't want to have it go on the market. It's been in the family now for 25 years. I know there's been some concerns about how it's degraded in that time, but we've sought over the past 5 years to try very hard to engage with Peak Park to get a way forward with it. So that's why the viability options all ranged from 5 apartments in the main house right through to the scheme that's before us now. They were all things that we could keep it in the family and more than one family could live in it or be using it as holiday accommodation. We've also addressed sustainability, I hope, with the biomass and district heating system, and that was raised at the last time. And I know there was also some concern about whether the EV points would be able to be supported. There is a firm quote from Northern Power Grid for the new scheme, because obviously there's going to be a lot more capacity needed on the site, so we have had a firm quote, so it is possible, because there'll also need to be 3-phase for the biomass boiler system. And I think I just hope that you can support us in this today, and see this asset restored. Key Sheffield figureheads, William and Sydney Jessup, that were behind the original building, and we just want to restore it back. We lost Jessup's Hospital, so it'd be nice just to keep some other parts that were reflective of that history. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Well, members, this was fairly emphatically approved by members of the committee at the last meeting, subject to us sorting out conditions, which are now set out on page 72 onwards in the recommendation. I'm happy to move the recommendation as it stands. If anybody can... Ken, you're seconding that. Have members got any comments or questions about the conditions and circumstances? Ginny?
Only the introduction of solar panels where possible.
I think that's a request rather than a condition, isn't it? Do you understand the point that's being made there? You're being asked to consider, in the interest of ecology and so on, the possibilities of using solar panels, particularly on the new buildings, for energy conservation and the like. And I can hear you from here.
Just about, so we have explored the possibilities of that, and I think there was a discussion between ourselves and John as to how viable, in terms of where they would be located, how viable that would be necessarily. But that's, we're aware that there is to be some form of revision to that extension to the back of the large Edinburgh.
It's probably going to benefit you as much as anybody else, I would imagine. Okay, you're happy with that? Okay. On that basis, members, can we have all those in favour of the motion? Anyone against? All that is carried, and thank you for your attendance. And we'll now move on to... Right, Heather Lee, the Hillock Kerber. We have a number of speakers on this, but John, I think you're going to introduce it for us.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll go through it again as brief as possible, bearing in mind we've got some new members who won't have seen the presentation last time. It was deferred from the last planning committee to enable clarification over the site dimensions and levels. The proposal is for the construction or the demolition of the existing garage on the site and the construction of a dependent relative annex. The property sits in the centre of Kerber Village, off the hillock here, and within the conservation area. It comprises a bungalow, stone-built bungalow here, and an artificial stone garage on the point of the site here. The back of the site, or the north of the site, backs onto this adjoining range of outbuildings to Green Farm. And one of the concerns for the last committee and the representations was that this barn was over 400 years old and was a heritage asset. It's not listed. In fact, it was listed, but it was delisted some years ago as a result of extensions and alterations which have largely diluted any character it had. So it's debatable whether it's just a traditional building or non-designated now. The majority of it has been rebuilt and is a facsimile of the building that stood there before. Either way, nevertheless, it still makes an important contribution to the character of the village, and we'll see in the photographs in a moment. Nearest neighbouring property is the house on the opposite side of the street. The short cul-de-sac, as well as providing access for Heatherley and this other property opposite, also provides access to small agricultural field and buildings there. So moving on to the next slide, it just shows that relationship in a bit more detail. As put before you at the last committee meeting, the proposed annex was very close to the rear of this barn, stands to the north, and concern was expressed by the neighbour about undermining foundations there and the ability to manage the wall which would be covered up by this development. So the amended plans now move that a metre away so that enable access for repointing. And we'll see in the section it's been, the amount of excavation has been reduced. I've measured the site. There is sufficient space to get that 1 metre in, build the annex of this scale, and still provide space for vehicles to park clear of the highway. There is 2 further parking spaces for the house. Potentially one of those, it's unlikely an elderly person may have more than one car there. So just lead you through the slide showing the context. So this is this little cul-de-sac off the hillock, the bungalows to the left. You can see the neighbour's barn in the background, and this is the current garage. Because it's on a hillside, the land rises gently, as you can see in the slide, as it rises up towards the Kerber hillside there. Looking directly at the garage, no particular merit. The gateway there to the right to the neighbour's field. This is within the garden. There's the existing garage. There has already been, you can see on the slide, an excavation here to provide a flat amenity area for the occupiers. Previous occupiers carried this out, which hasn't exposed the foundations of the barn, which runs into the hillside. I've put a piece of, when I took the photograph, I put this plank there to show the extent of where the annex would come to. It is longer than the garage, so members can see that would be the extent of the gable end, if you bear that in mind when we look at the elevation slides. And just a close-up, and even closer, showing that the current garage impinges quite closely at the back corner up against the building and was built in that fashion. So I won't dwell on the existing garage, you can see what that's like. The proposed annex is a 1-bedroom annex for one of the applicant's elderly relatives to come and live with them. The other relative is going to be living in the bungalow with them. It's accessible, laid out for accessible standards, and there will be a small terrace and a pathway to the street on the left-hand side of this slide. So there's the existing garage and the proposed annex. In this slide it's shown, this is one of the slides from June. Bearing in mind the cutting levels, we need to refer just to the amended plans I'll show you in a minute, which shows a less reduction into the site, but that just shows that in overall terms it would have a broadly similar impact upon the setting of the barn behind as to the existing garage. It would be built out of natural stone versus artificial stone, and it would have tiles to match the bungalow. And then looking up from the bungalow, existing garage and the annex. And from the field behind, it's tucked behind a hedge, so there'd be minimal impact. That's what the gable would look like behind the hedge. And then from the other elevation, which will be hidden by the barn, a blank elevation. And roof plan, just a single roof light on that back corner. So in terms of the excavation previously, we talked about it being a metre reduction into the ground, which was of significant concern for the neighbour. These plans show it would be a fairly minimal raft foundation and would be approximately 200 millimetres reduction with a slight greater fall on this side, but substantially less than before. So as officers, we don't believe there would be any likelihood of adverse impact on the structure of the adjoining barn. And there's more than adequate space for parking So on that basis, we recommend approval, but I would like to just adjust the conditions which were written in advance of that amended section plan being brought in. So previously, when there was greater excavation, in condition 2, we had a comment about no excavation and detailing proposed retaining walls, which would have been effectively the back wall of the annex. So if I can delete everything after amended plans, so it's condition 2 would just read development in accordance with specified amended plans, which would have an extra condition which would refer specifically to the level of the annex to be set as per the amended section drawing, to make it clear that it's which drawing is approved in terms of how far it's set into the site. And then the other conditions would be renumbered. And because we've now got this plan which makes it clear that the existing landscape into the street is being maintained and enhanced already, we don't need the final landscaping condition. We can leave that to the occupiers to manage their garden how they see fit. So with that, Chair, recommend approval. Hand it back to the committee. Thank you.
So we delete item 10, condition 10. Okay, we have 4 speakers in various media. The first one I have is Jane Newman, who should know the rules by now. Welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I'm making representations about the proposed development of a residential annex at Heatherley on behalf of Martha North, the neighbour to the site. Martha is away and can't be here herself. Martha lives at the neighbouring property Green Farm. The farm is from the 1800s and there is a barn within the curtilage which may be affected by the proposals. The barn may be as old as 400 years. The barn has been altered over time and is not listed, but it is still a heritage asset. It certainly has no modern foundations, and while it is altered, it is not a modern structure. It is still essentially a historic barn. The report says that the proposals will move development further away from the barn, but the plans do not show this. The existing site plan shows that at the closest point the garage is 1 metre from the barn and the other end is 2 metres from the barn. The proposed annex is shown on the plans at 0.9 metres from the wall of the barn all along the rear elevation of the annex. Requiring the annex to be built 1.1 metre away from the barn doesn't meet the legal test of a reasonable condition because it requires the applicant to develop something significantly different to what is proposed, which may mean that the parking spaces on the front of the property can't be delivered. The proposals will affect the setting of the barn by obscuring a much greater part of the rear elevation. Martha is very concerned because the existing garage is unlikely to have significant foundations. The proposed lowering of the land by 1 metre and the digging of foundations has a reasonable prospect of causing harm to the stability of the barn, which itself is unlikely to have foundations. This is likely to cause serious harm or even loss of the non-designated heritage asset. There is no reasoning explained as to why officers think that a 1.1 metre separation between the two will somehow prevent this harm. Your policy DMC5 says that where adequate or accurate detailed information is not provided to show the effect of the development on the significance of the asset and its setting, the application will be refused. The National Planning Practice Guidance clearly sets out that land stability is a planning matter and that preliminary assessment of ground instability should be carried out at the earliest possible stage before a detailed planning application is prepared. This has not happened and the application contains no information about stability. The proposal is likely to cause harm to the setting of the non-designated heritage asset. Furthermore, there is a realistic prospect it will cause instability to the barn that may lead to its loss or irreparable harm to the fabric of the building. This is contrary to local and national policies. If a residential annex is acceptable in principle, and you consider that having taken into account a proper assessment of significance, that it is not harmful to the setting of Green Farm, the barn and the conservation area, then the application should be amended to move the annex a much greater distance from the barn to avoid instability. I also note that the Planning Committee report does not include a paragraph about sustainability. I also note that the sustainability statement provided with the application commits that there will be energy efficient light fittings, the use of insulation and local materials and labour. This seems like a very minimal commitment to sustainability given the climate crisis. This is insufficient commitment to meet the requirements of policy CC1, which requires every project to achieve the highest possible standards of carbon reduction and water efficiency. I trust that you will take these comments into account in determining the application.
Thank you very much. We will be asking questions about that later, John. I've next got Sandra Poxton. Right. I think your microphone's on, isn't it? Yes.
Yes,
Okay. You've
yeah.
got 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, planners, members of the committee, the concerns which I raise are the result of seeking the advice of a professional who is fully conversant with all of the planning policies. Point 9 of the report. I am reliably informed that Peak Park Planning would normally ask for a gable end to have a maximum of 6 metres, and the proposal is almost 7 metres. The additional comments relate to the bedroom window at the front being too large and whether the door and window on the side elevation were acceptable. Quote, Peak Park Planning do not usually like openings on gables. The advisor also quotes, levels of the area are not clear and a full-site topographical survey would show the existing and proposed levels and boundaries. Parking and highway safety. Point 39 states that the proposed annex would have 2 parking spaces to the front with 3 parking spaces remaining for the main bungalow. Correct me if I am wrong, but it would appear now that there are 5 parking spaces. This is an incorrect statement when reality there may be only room for 2. Point 52, quote, the professional advisor states that the space shown in front of the proposed building looks too small for 2 cars and is on an incline. Added to which it would be, the advisor states, it's too small for 2 cars, added to which it would be necessary to provide wide disabled persons parking space for the 2 wheelchair users who will live separately at the property. Transferring from a car to a wheelchair on an incline would be hazardous. I am advised that the recently extended existing car parking space at the bungalow still only provides 1 parking space. Highway safety issues, quote, parking shown in front of the proposed new building is to reverse out, creating 2 safety issues. 1, reversing onto the highway. 2, the track is only narrow and it would be necessary to reverse onto a private drive. It is questionable whether point 55, which concludes that the parking proposed is commensurate with the need and scale of the building, is therefore correct. There are errors and omissions in the planning report, of which I remarked in my letters of objection on the 6th of April, 27th of June, and in my representation to the Planning Committee of the 16th of June. Unfortunately, these objections have not been addressed. Thank you this morning for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Can I just ask, apart from being a concerned citizen, I presume you're an immediate neighbour somewhere?
Yes, I own Westview directly opposite,
Okay.
which is named on the Ordnance Survey as Castle Cottage Farm Bungalow.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I now have Professor Crook from Kerbar Parish Council.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Professor Tony Crook. I'm a chartered planner and a fellow of the Royal Town Planning Institute, but I'm here today on behalf of the Council. We've got 3 comments on this application. First, on design. It's in a conservation area, so particular regard needs to be had to the design and its impact on the area. Heatherley is a typical bungalow of the 1960s, which, apart from the materials used, do not respect the local vernacular and character. We think the proposal does not have sufficient regard to your design guide, where the clear guidance for new buildings in paragraphs 323 to 332 about solid to void ratios, verticality of windows, and advice against picture windows has not been followed, we respectfully submit. And we further submit that approving this application would be contrary to paragraph 134 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which unambiguously states that development that does not comply with design guides should be refused. The second point is on the ancillary accommodation itself, and we fully are sympathetic with the need for this kind of accommodation. Let that not be misunderstood. But we also think it's critical to ensure that if you give permission, it continues to be ancillary accommodation and doesn't somehow leak into holiday lettings if the house is passed on with a subsequent purchase.
And we submit that we think entering into a Section 106 agreement will give greater protection to the future than a planning commission. And of course, this is consistent with DM H5 in your development management policies. And our third and final comment, Chair, is on parking. I think I'm repeating what I've just heard. I counted 5 cars on the road, 3 of which were parked on the site yesterday evening. Now, I know the Highways Authority haven't objected, but I do think the parking proposed compromises the design. The amended application shows a number of spaces. We respectfully draw your attention to the picture on your screen showing the 2 cars in front of the new annex. This means that the elderly person in bed will look out at 2 cars. And we think that's not good for the occupant, and I think it compromises the design. So, Chair, that's the view of the Parish Council in general. I want to make it very clear to members that we are not opposed to the provision of ancillary accommodation. We know it's quite important, and we think this particular proposal doesn't fit the bill and conflicts with your policies. I hope that's helpful. And happy, of course, Chair, to answer any questions. Thank you very much. And we now have a statement to be read from the applicant. Karen, you're doing that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a statement from Mr and Mrs Bedford, the applicant. We have listened to the objections made in the previous planning meeting and would like to make the following statement. Use of building. Our original plan was to stay renting Westview and rent out Heatherley as holiday lets until such time as Helen's parents required accommodating. In the meantime, Helen's cancer diagnosis and treatment has made us realise this would be too much work for Helen, and we therefore took the decision to move into Heatherley and apply for ancillary accommodation for her parents. Helen's mother has been diagnosed with vascular dementia and has mobility issues. Her father is suffering again with angina, having already had 2 bypasses, a new heart valve and a pacemaker. Both are officially classed as disabled. We currently have to regularly travel to Shrewsbury to care for them. Our main fear is that Helen's father passes away, which would mean her mother would not be able to stay in her own home. She is terrified of going into a care home. Further into the future, we would use the building as an additional living space for ourselves for home working, hobbies and visiting family accommodation. We may also require a living carer ourselves later in life, as we have no children of our own. The boundary. We agree that a gap between the barn and the development will be beneficial to both parties, and this should ideally be shown on the original plan as we intended. After consultation with the planning department, we immediately instructed our architect to change the building position as per the amended plan submitted. That said, the barn Mrs North refers to, which is listed in the monuments record as an unlisted Victorian farmstead, is not an untouched ancient building, but has in fact been heavily rebuilt and extended by the Norths. Her statement is clearly designed to delay the application. One assumes their extension on the barn also went next to existing foundations and does not appear to have caused a problem. Parking. Having happily rented Mrs Pollock's property Westview for the previous 5 years, we have never had an issue with parking at the property or problems with vehicles at Heatherley entering and exiting their driveway. The current development plan will not change this entranceway. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, members, John, can I just first of all pick up on the points that Jane Newman was making? Can we get absolutely, I rather got the impression, but I may be wrong, that she was talking about a set of plans that have now changed. Is that right?
Yes, largely, yeah. The previous plans showed significantly greater excavation into the site. It was set down at least 1 metre, whereas this plan shows that, and there's a further plan, which, sorry, I don't seem to have been included in the presentation, which shows the cut the other way, that shows that it fairly minimal intervention into the ground, which will probably be broadly similar to what the existing garage foundations have done. So I have no concerns over and above any other form of development which regularly occurs, that there be an adverse impact on the neighbouring property. The foundations will be a building regulations matter, and there's obviously a duty of care if you're doing any excavation near neighbouring boundaries, but the existing ground is stable. There's no land stability issues as far as I'm aware. It's just the concern of potentially excavating foundations. And we can see in the photographs of the excavated area that's taken place already by the previous site owners, significantly greater now than what is proposed, up against the barn, hasn't revealed the foundations. So that lends a little bit more weight to that.
Thank you. Members? Ken Richardson.
Yeah, I'm in favour of this, but I question the second recommendation. How will that be policed? Because it's been mentioned a 106 agreement would be far better. Because unless somebody keeps going round, how do they know, you know, elderly parents and whatever, they will pass away and then Airbnb calling.
Well, the requirement of, well, there are two or three things here, aren't there? It has long been established that when you get this sort of ancillary accommodation for elderly people, you can control it by condition of the sort that's set out here. Government policy is fairly clear. It says you don't insist upon a Section 106 agreement where a condition will do. And this sort of condition is the sort of condition that has been applied, well, to my personal knowledge, for the best part of 50 or 60 years. So I don't think there's anything unusual in that. But what the condition effectively requires is that it should be ancillary to the dwelling house. And providing it remains ancillary to the dwelling house, what they use for it, if it's no longer used for an old folks person, is their affair, provided that it's ancillary to the dwelling house. That is the way the system works. I don't think there's very much we can do about that. Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. Can you bring up the picture with the which shows the parking spaces, and that's the one. The lower two seem to be absolutely cheap by jowl, and I don't see how that's workable. How would a person get out of a car? That really doesn't look right to me. It looks to me like you've got 3 parking spaces, not 4 in practice.
That's not part of the application. That's existing parking that's already in place. I'll show you the slide there. There does appear to be space for parking 2 cars there and get out. Yes, it might be tight, but there's nothing to suggest you can't fit 2 cars on there.
So it's the drawing that might be slightly inaccurate. Okay, that clarifies that one. One of the objectors raised concerns about contradictions with, well, I think it was the professor raised concerns about the contradictions with the design guide. Just wondered how officers would address that point.
Yes, it's a balance here between encouraging better design of applicants and what they submit, and in this case providing reasonable amenity for the elderly person who's going to be the primary occupant of this if it goes ahead. So yes, in an ideal world we wouldn't want to see gables with French windows in, but nevertheless we do approve them from time to time. I think it's reasonable here. The elevation is fairly robust with more stone than opening, and in the context of what it replaces and the improvement of materials, there's either going to be a neutral or a slight net benefit to the conservation area. Probably more neutral, bearing in mind the garage versus this, and its height now, which don't forget the height is now raised from as originally submitted against the barn behind.
I think it has to be seen as well in the context of the main house. This is not an old listed building or something. This is itself a 70s house. Yeah. Has to be put in that sort of context. Can I just ask about, again, Jane Newman's point about the eco side of things, CC1. We perhaps have missed something out there, haven't we?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that the application is somewhat deficient in that. More could be done. We need to just check the orientation, whether obviously we could put a condition on requiring them to submit and agree details of a more comprehensive scheme to improve the sustainability of the development, and whilst making sure it's proportionate to the scale.
Yeah, and also outside lighting, perhaps.
That would be appropriate, to be sensor controlled and just to do the job and not spill outside of the site, certainly.
And Kath, was it you who put your hand up? Sorry. Kath, you're next.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Mike has the same concerns as myself. And there's nothing to stop, if we allowed this, the owner going to try and take that, say the parents had died, to take for an independent dwelling house. And who knows, they might win and get it. And then you've got, I mean, you really ought to have a site visit to see the narrowness of the lanes and the very difficult situation this is to make a real fair judgment. I mean, I go to Curb, I was there on Thursday, I did not stay in to the meeting when planning came up, but I'm au fait with the narrowness of the lanes, and it's very, very difficult to manoeuvre around this area. If you're going to have this turned eventually into an independent, although it states here they could take it to appeal, and then we're back to square one. Even more vehicles on this site. So my main concern is the vehicles, and I think it's really quite important as well to note the barn. I'm very keen on archaeology, and I know there's 2,650 barns in the national park, and I would hate to see this one in close proximity to this building damaged in any way. As it states, it's a 400-year-old barn, and I would like some reassurance on that, but as it stands, I'm afraid I couldn't support this application. Thank you.
Okay. Any other members? Ginny?
In that we are
Mike, could you turn your thing off? Thank you.
In that we are looking at a building that's already there, albeit it's used as a garage. I don't have a problem, subject to the sustainability, of replacing that garage with an ancillary building, but I do have concerns that in the future it could be a holiday let, so I would like us to be able to secure, or holiday accommodation, secure it to the main building.
Okay. Are you moving it for approval, subject to those additional conditions and the deletion of the final condition, right? And you've seconded that, Mike. Has any other member got any contribution to make? In that case, I will put the motion to the meeting. All those in favour of approving it on those altered terms?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Anyone against? And for the avoidance of doubt, she's recording it. That is now carried. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your contributions. Can I move on now to... now, I'm in something of a dilemma, because I've been asked if I will deal with the enforcement report first. But I see I've got a note on the agenda to say that somebody's coming to see the enforcement report at 1:30. Are we able to ring Mr. Ford and tell him he's too late? Or anybody got any suggestions as to how we handle that? I think as it's in the right place on the agenda, I've got to give priority to somebody coming later on, haven't I? I can't see that I've got any, and I can't get Andrew Cook here in time. I'm sorry, Cressbrook, those of you who are here, I think it's...
Apologies, I'm guessing to Jane, who I knew very well when I chaired your minerals liaison group. I apologise for doing that. We'll do it outside.
Well, we'll be dealing with Jane's next application very shortly. I apologise to the Cressbrook people. I'm afraid I'm going to have to deal with the enforcement at the end of the agenda.
And Jane's here for that next one.
I know she is. Joanna, could you tell Jane we're going on to the next item on the agenda, which is Newby House, Baslow? Right, it's 5 to 12. Newbury House, Baslow. This was John Keeley again, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Newbury House, overlaying Baslow. It's a detached house, you see here, located on the northern edge of the village of Baslow. This takes access off the main A623 Carver Road, which is here. The access comes up, serves another residential property to the west of Newby House, serves Newby House, and then continues on to link with Over Lane. You've got residential development to the south of the site, which includes Baslow Hall, or Fisher's Restaurant, as it's more widely known as. Just move on. The property over the years has been already significantly extended in the past. You'll see in the elevation, you can see here the plan form to create a double bay-fronted house which faces west, with a conservatory which sits on the rear, and a detached garage building with accommodation. There's extensive gardens with it, and off-street parking, fairly mature landscaping. So the planning consent was granted earlier this year after a design refusal on an earlier application for further extensions and alterations to the house. These comprised a replacement conservatory, a replacement garage with accommodation above, and an extension to each gable. The amended scheme was heavily revised and gained approval. This current application seeks further design changes and position changes to those approved elements. So I'll lead you through those changes. So a few slides to show the house as it stands at the moment. So that's the west-facing elevation. So you can see it's an attractive property, built in local stone, tiled roof, gable end. See the parking area, you can see the conservatory coming into view, the current timber conservatory, and then from the rear, the garage and ancillary accommodation above. Oh, has it popped off? I beg your pardon. So I'll lead you through the slides, because this is the existing layout, which you've seen in the photographs. We have the as approved layout, so I can show you the comparison to what we've approved. Obviously, we're not making a direct comparison, because what's approved was acceptable in its own right. The test is whether this new development or the change is acceptable in its own right. We're not asking you to make a choice between the two you prefer. You need to make a decision on whether the proposed scheme is acceptable on its own merits. But it's important to see what we've approved and to understand where we are today. So that was the approved scheme, which moved the garage from the northern part of the site, brought it closer to the access, creating a more screened area to the back, and a replacement conservatory. And then on each side there were lean-to extensions, fairly modest in scale. There was also a basement beneath the garage with accommodation above. We'll see in the floor plans. So as proposed now, the conservatory or garden room, now it's got more solidity, is moved further to the north, so it projects beyond the gable end of the existing house. The garage remains exactly the same, broadly the same. There's only a very minor change to the back of the garage, to roof lights, to the basement. So we have no concerns whatsoever to the garage amendments. the main design concerns relate to the position and roofing of these and scale of these extensions, along with their elevational treatment. The extensions to the side have grown in size and have a different design, which will become more apparent in the elevations. So that's just existing layout at first floor. So no concerns about the garage. As approved, the rear replacement conservatory had a hipped roof, which reflected the main house, and lean-tos, again, simple design. As proposed, the floor plan, we have a different roof structure, a very shallow hipped roof on each of the extensions now, and that would be formed in zinc, and there'd be an overhanging eaves, which you'll see in the elevations more clearly. And the final plan, just the second story, I should say, there is within the existing house a conversion of the loft space. Again, there's no concerns about that, so the concerns are focused on these three extensions and the elevational treatment. So that's that proposed second floor plan today. So moving on, I'll skip past that. That's the existing elevation facing west. As approved, with fairly simple lean-to, largely stone extensions with modest glazing. And as proposed now in this current scheme. So they have become slightly wider, predominantly more glazing, and you have these aluminium screens or louvers which slide across above a stone base. And as I said, the roof is a zinc, very shallow hipped design, which would appear almost like a stepped flat roof design with the overhanging eaves. This is wraparound glazing here, just around the corner. There's more solidity, and you'll see in the other elevation, whereas on this extension on the northern side, it is predominantly glazed above a stone base wall, such that it looks like a roof above a glazed section with stone below. These are the inner elevations of the two forward projecting bays. I won't dwell on these because the approved scheme allowed increase in those openings, and it's the same in this. So I won't dwell on those. This is the elevation from the driveway looking north, as the house exists at the moment, and as proposed, as the approved rather, I should say. So you had a replacement garden room for the current timber conservatory, spaced off with a little flat roof link, and this was the southern of the two lean-tos, predominantly stone, timber doors. And as proposed in this current application, the garden room loses its hipped roof to come this very, very shallow hip design, but as I said, appears almost as a flat roof. Stone and bifold doors are introduced now with a very minimal set off from the house. And the side extension, there's the wraparound window I talk about, the aluminium vertical slats which slide across the opening, and similar door. And this will become the main entrance into the house. And then from the rear elevation, as approved, I should say again, this is where significant alterations to the elevation took place. You had alteration to the openings and a large, deep-set, two-storey glazed panel into the back of the house, and the replacement conservatory with more of a garden room with doors set within the elevation there, and existing chimneys on this side removed. And as proposed in the current application, you see the glazing of the rear elevation has been refined further, in many respects creating more solidity here, but increasing the scale of this by another bay, and pushing the garden room, shall we say, over to the north, and without the hip roof, clearing these windows, and then the back end of the entrance extension on the south side there. obviously, I say that's not the true elevation from the garden because the garage has been omitted for clarity. So if you were looking from the east, further up the east of the garden, looking back at the house, the true elevation would be included with the approved garage. A very slight amendment to this rear with a little lean-to changing from the approved elevation to a almost flat glazed openings down into the cellar below. So that was as approved and then as proposed now. The key design concern that explained in your report is to how the near flat roof extensions now relate to the character and appearance of and solidity of the house, and how the roof, that flat roof, doesn't match or take its cues sufficiently from the main house, and is more akin to a flat roof, which is advised against in our design guidance. There's also some concern, although it isn't the main concern, about the projection off the gable. And the other elevation, this is the north elevation, existing as approved and then as proposed with the revised design. All this would be glazed with the zinc roofing and a lowish stone boundary, low stone base walls there, again with these aluminium sliding louvers. This is very much a hidden elevation looking east at the back of the proposed garden room. And the other elevation, the east elevation of the north extension as it faces the rear of the garden room. As I said, the existing garage, no great merits, and the accommodation, the approved scheme is very similar to the scheme now. There's a requirement for light down into the basement, gym and plant room. There was little lean-to before, and it's now more simply dealt with. There's more of a flat flush, near flush detail there, which is equally acceptable. So there's no concerns with that. And as I say, the main concern is about the design, which for those reasons, Chair, the lack of empathy with the character of the existing house and the introduction of near flat roofs are the key reasons for the officers recommending refusal. Thank you.
Right, thank you. We have one speaker who we've met before, Jane Newman. And buses.
The host building is not typical of the Peak District building tradition, and it is not a vernacular building. The property is located in a large plot and is a good example of detached gritstone property from the early 20th century. The proposed reasons for refusal include 3 elements: siting of the rear extension, the roof forms, and detailed design. Officers think that the proposal does not meet the high standard of design required by local policy. The scheme has been designed by a RIBA award-winning architect and responds to the property and its setting to achieve a cohesive scheme. The report sets out that the siting of the extension is inappropriate because it is on a corner and offset from the rear. They cite the alterations and extensions SPD, but that quote says that extensions on the corner are best avoided because the resultant massing is overcomplicated and at odds with the vernacular tradition. In this case, the building is not a vernacular building in the local building tradition, so the siting offset from the corner is not inherently unacceptable. The plot is large enough to accommodate the siting, and the effect simplifies the appearance of the scheme because it allows more of the rear of the host building to be revealed. The report also takes issue with the roof forms. These have been carefully considered and are an architectural response to the hipped roof on the host building, which has been interpreted in a contemporary way. The overhanging eaves on the additions reference the overhanging eaves on the host building, and the stepped roof form provides a deliberate architectural form referencing the hipped roof on the host building, but without copying it. In terms of the detailing, the scheme is contemporary, and the alterations and extensions SPD outlines that contemporary detailing for an extension is a valid approach. The building is not traditional and has more glazing than vernacular buildings. The use of glass in the scheme references this. The use of zinc is an intentional modern detail, balanced with a high degree of gritstone. The additions are deliberately not a pastiche. They are good quality contemporary design which should not be limited in the national park to only be acceptable in replacement dwellings. The scheme proposed is high quality. The additions are separate but are cohesive, ensuring that the scheme overall does not appear piecemeal. The scheme also draws upon elements of the architectural character of the host building, but without directly copying the form. The scheme is in accordance with policy and will conserve and enhance the positive qualities of the building and its context in the National Park. I also add that in making the decision, you are not being asked to choose which you prefer between the approved scheme and the proposed scheme. The decision is about whether or not this second scheme is acceptable in and of itself. And as I've set out, I believe it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Members, anybody got any thoughts on this? Well, if nobody else has, I'll have. Look, I accept that this, the actual designs of these extensions is actually quite a clever and good design. But what I do have difficulty with is the point that's being made by the officers, which it's about the relationship of these to the host building. It's that connection between the two. I mean, it's quite clear that they have been architect designed to a quite high quality. But the nature of this house and the nature of the extensions and the way they all hang together as a whole seems to me the issue that we ought to turn our minds to. Let's put it that way round.
I think it's misrepresentative because you never see the house from that angle. You'll never see both the extensions at once. I think the rear elevation is much more relevant to the debate.
That's a perfectly good argument, but you know perfectly well you don't interrupt. Sorry. Did I have Mike first? Yes, I did have Mike, then Kath.
I mean, I accept this is quite a high quality design, but I still think when it was raised that this is by a RIBA qualified architect of some prestige, I'm minded to note that, as with good musicians, even they can have an off day.
Even planning committee members can have an off
day too. Yes. I was thinking, when is the next? How soon is it going to be before the applicant applies for a license to open a restaurant with all that lovely glazing in there? I mean, it's a building from the early 20th century. It may not be a vernacular building, but it is built to a certain style, and I just think the building becomes more complicated as it's gone beyond the initial extensions. So I'm finding it hard to understand why we would not go with the officer recommendation on this.
Thank you, Mike. I've got Kath Potter next.
Thank you, Chair. I really think it wants a site visit. I think members should see this home. It has been done in a fantastic way. It's going back, I forget, well, probably says, but it's so complex in one way, but it's so well designed in another. And I really think members ought to just see how it fits in the environment. So I can't vote against, but I think we ought to have a site visit.
Okay, thank you very much. And I've got Ginny next.
And I agree with both points that have been made. It's a very clever design, the new design, but it does seem to have a lot of glazing, and to me it gives a sort of higgledy-piggledy look to the design. And I welcome Kath's suggestion for a site visit, because I think that would be very beneficial. So would it be appropriate to defer this item so that we can have a site visit?
I hear what you say. I've got Lydia next and then Andrew.
Yeah, for me, the rear elevation, I think, sits really well with the proposals. And I think it really actually simplifies the look of the rear. And I would fully support that. And my only thing that I didn't like was the front elevation. And Jane has said that that's not what you would see if you looked at it like that. So again, I think I would support a site visit if that's an option for us.
That looks as though it's where we're going. Andrew?
Yeah, I would agree with a site visit, I think. it would be appropriate. Some houses, I don't know what it is, but ones from the early 20th century sometimes get better when they're actually added onto. And it's strange, I've seen one or two like that in the past. So I think it would be advantageous to defer and get a site to visit.
Okay. Is that the wishes of members? Can I have a proposal for that in that case? And seconded. Does all those in favour of a site visit? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyone against? I'm abstaining and Ken's abstaining. Right, okay. A site visit it is in September, hopefully. September. And the next item we have is Pump Farm, Horslow. We now have a change of personnel. And we've got two reports here. We have the habitats regulations and the actual planning application itself. I presume you're going to present them both together, and we'll deal with the vote separately. Okie doke. We did do a site visit yesterday, which was, I think, quite helpful. Right, Mark?
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. So this application and the associated habitat regulations assessment are at Pump Farm in Worsley. The farm is owned by the National Park Authority as part of the Worsley Moor Estate, and the proposals here are to demolish an existing range of livestock and storage buildings, which on this plan, has to be said, the lines on the plan aren't particularly helpful on this particular version. I'll move in a moment to an aerial view which is clearer, but it's to remove an existing range of buildings and replace and alter those with a more modern installation that is fit for purpose. And the Peak District Moors Special Protection Area, South Pennine Moors Special Area of Conservation, and the Leek Moors Triple SI are approximately 1.4 kilometres to the north of the application site, with the nearest point of the Peak District Dales Special Area of Conservation lying roughly 2.4 kilometres to the south. And that's relevant insofar as this is why the habitat regulations assessment is required, which I'll come on to discuss in a few moments. So this is probably a more helpful view of the site. Is my cursor on the screen? It is, okay. So this is the access to the site off School Lane. This is at the southern end of Worsley Village. And you've got the original farmhouse here, and what were a range of traditional barns here, which are partway through conversion, and they will be used by the authority as part of the management of the estate, with the intention that the farmhouse and the new farm buildings, as they would be if approved, will be let out to a tenanted farmer to help management of the estate. So these are the existing buildings subject to the application here. And as you can see, they almost run into one sort of a mass at the moment. And this is the Slurry Lagoon to the southwest. So the proposals are to alter this building, to demolish all of these buildings, and to infill the Slurry Lagoon here. And there will be a replacement building on the footprint of this, which you'll see as we go through. So this shows the proposed site layout. So the building here is partially existing. So this section here is existing. This section at this end would be demolished, which is currently facing the farmhouse. That would be removed, and it would be extended instead at the other end. So this becomes a shorter building, but just pushed further south in the site. And the existing buildings, which are roughly on the footprint that you can see me outlining there, are replaced by a single new building under a single span, which again pushes slightly further south in the site. The slurry store currently here is infilled. So this shows the existing range of buildings. As you can see, they're of mixed style, mixed age, and generally in a poor condition and not fit for modern farming purposes. At the right-hand side there, you can just see the more slightly more recent portal frame building, which is the one which is to be partially demolished and extended at the other end. This is a view from the northeast, showing back. You can see the farmhouse in the background there. So all of the buildings that you can see in this photograph would be removed. And this is showing them from the other end. And this is looking towards the slurry lagoon, which would be filled in. And sorry, I've not mentioned this part of the proposal. It's relatively minor, but the low stone walled area you can see enclosed here at this end of an outbuilding would actually be demolished as well. There's no proposals to otherwise alter or extend this building though. And these are one of the pretty limited public views from within the conservation area. So you're looking back from School Lane, so you can just see the end of the buildings here. And this is a floor plan, so this shows the small area that would be demolished. This is looking at that small stone outbuilding I just showed you, with the remainder to be retained. And the same, this is the section that would be removed. And so this is obviously the bulk of the application, showing the buildings that are to be demolished. So everything that you can see below this line here is to go. And this is from the opposite end. And side elevation. Other side. This is showing the portal frame building now, which is the one which is to be partly retained. And this shows how it's to be altered. The description here isn't actually entirely accurate. It describes this as 3 new bays. So at the moment, the building extends from this point here all the way across to here. So these bays at the end will be removed. 2 of these bays aren't actually new, they're retained. And then there's an extension of 1 bay to the end. And that's showing that same thing in plan form and from the other side. And this is the proposed new building, which would be a similar design with clad sheeting profile sheeting rather, above concrete panels. And you can see here this sheeted gate. This building's open to the front because it's to house livestock on the farm. And there you go, you can see the front elevation where it's open. The roof lights along here to allow light into the building. And this shows the proposed mass against the built mass. The building at this side is already of this height, and as you see it from this end in this same position, the red dotted line shows what would be removed, and this is the new building. So the yard area becomes between the 2 buildings, whereas at the moment they span all of that area pretty much. And you can see the overall height actually comes down slightly from the ridge height of the tallest building, albeit at this edge of the site, the built form is taller than it is at the moment. I'll perhaps go back to the aerial view to talk through the rest, because I think that's the most helpful in terms of understanding the site. So if I take the HRA assessment first, then the Habitat Regulations assessment process involves several stages, with stage 1 being screening for likely significant effects on the protected areas. The purpose of the test is to screen whether a full appropriate assessment is required. Where likely significant effects can be excluded, assessing them in more detail through the further stages of appropriate assessment isn't required. The potential impact of the development on these sites arising through atmospheric ammonia emissions and nitrogen deposition arising from cattle housed in the shed. Natural England advised that an adverse effect may occur if emissions exceed 1% of the critical load for the relevant habitats for which the sites qualify. In this case, a report making an assessment of those emissions was provided with the application. That report only takes account of the proposed development, not the existing. So it indicated that the proposed development alone, i.e. if the emissions from the proposed new cattle shed, ignoring the removal of these existing facilities, is all that's taken into account, would contribute over 1% of the critical load levels. And as a result, a stage 2 assessment is therefore required for the sites. So that appropriate assessment has been carried out as is set out in the report, but the proposal will involve the removal of the existing livestock units and a reduction in slurry by moving to a bedded system, i.e. Straw. Whilst it's acknowledged that a bedded system may contribute to ammonia emissions in and of itself, overall the emissions will be reduced compared to the amount of emissions created by the existing livestock buildings, partly because the overall area of livestock buildings will be reduced, and that would reduce stocking capacity down to 70 from the currently 100 plus that it could accommodate. And therefore emissions will be further reduced, and they won't exceed those stated within the emissions report. In addition, further mitigation measures that will manage the emission levels are detailed within the emissions assessment that's been submitted. And in summary, it's considered that the proposal will not have any significant adverse effect on the integrity of the South Pennine Moors SAC or the Peak District Moors SPA, and will in fact have a positive impact when compared to the existing situation. Therefore, the development is not contrary to the provisions of the Conservation of Habitats and Species regulations, and we recommend that the report is adopted as the assessment. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to deal with that first and then get on to it? Yes. Have any members got any questions on the habitats regulations? In that case, I'm going to move that that report be approved. Is that seconded? That is seconded. All those in favour of adopting the habitats regulations? Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Now we'll proceed to the next one.
Thanks, Chair. So, moving on to the planning application itself. The provision of farm buildings and the improvement of the farm business is supported by planning policy in principle. Officers have made an assessment of the visual impacts of the buildings. There's some benefits to moving them further south in terms of it removes them from the setting of the existing historic farm buildings to some degree. And in wider views, the impacts will be largely unchanged. The site will, in terms of its built form, will project ever so slightly further southwest rather, but there's very limited views of that in the wider landscape from School Lane. Views from across the valley to the southeast will show the building group in much the same position as it is now, and so there will be no adverse impacts in that regard. The proposals do involve the removal of some trees to facilitate moving the buildings further southwest, and a proposal for replacement tree planting is included and recommended to be secured by the conditions that are set out in the report. The infilling of the slurry lagoon does result in a loss of some foraging habitat for bats and protected species, and once again the conditions recommended in the report are for a replacement pond to be secured within the site, and the authority's ecologist is satisfied that there's space to do that, albeit the position at this time isn't confirmed. There's a condition to require that, and there's also a scheme of ecological enhancement and mitigation set out to be secured by condition as well. Subject to those conditions, we're satisfied that the application complies with planning policy in principle and would have no further adverse impacts on the special qualities of the national park, and it's recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, well, thanks very much, Mark. Can I just raise one or two issues? One of the conditions says that the lighting strategy as detailed in something or other, the ecological appraisal, will be implemented. What roughly was that about? I noticed the big building has a huge number of roof lights, and I'm conscious of a big building that was built very near our village, which looks like a major city at night at the moment, from lighted roof lights.
I haven't got the details of the lighting scheme in front of me, I'm afraid, and it's not included in the photographs here, in the plans that I've got here. However, if it's referring to what's referenced in the ecology report, then that will be minimising external lighting for the benefit of bats and birds. And so, for that reason, I can say with reasonable confidence that that would include not lighting inside that building at night, because that would obviously have the adverse effect.
Well, we may need. We ought to be very clear about that is what we're doing. My second one is looking particularly at the new big building. The base of all the buildings is these white concrete panels, which will be seen over quite a long way away from the northeast elevation in particular. Wouldn't we want some sort of treatment of that to make sure that it's not visible in the wider environment? They're very unsightly, these big concrete panels.
I think that's a fair point, Chair. This is the elevation that we're referring to. I've got up on the screen now, and you're quite right. Typically, that timber boarding would be pulled further down the building. We could require that to come down to to just above ground level, if that members think that's appropriate.
Well, can we have a condition to that effect? And the third one I have, we've got a condition about bats, and we've got a condition about great crested newts, and we've got a general ecological condition of one sort or another. But Lee and I particularly noticed on site visit yesterday, huge number of swifts. And I hope, I would like to see a condition that actually puts up front what we're going to do, because these buildings, the swifts will love. And when you replace it with a modern building that's got straight lines and all the rest of it, they haven't a clue what to do, as I found to our cost on my site. So can we have a condition that really addresses what can be done to ensure that the place is Swift friendly and maintainable as such? Swift boxes are all right, but they have to be looked after. Andrew Hart has something to say on that, I think.
I think that's fine, Chair. We've got the scheme of ecological enhancement strategy to be submitted. We can have that refer specifically to the provision of Swift habitat.
Yes, it really needs to address the issue. Andrew, the point you were going to make.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chair. I no longer have swifts in my buildings. They seem to have stopped somewhere over the Mediterranean and never came back. So anywhere that still has them really should be enhanced.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody, sorry, I'm happy to move the report subject to those amendments. Are you happy to second it? Yeah, and when you want to speak.
Yeah, if I may, Chair, just to make the point that obviously I support the proposals, but I think we're moving from into a less polluting and less impactful position with these buildings, moving the facilities into the 21st century. And I think with the use of part of the farm as the base for estate staff, it's this kind of thing, and with the new farming regime that's being proposed, that is exactly what the National Park Authority should be doing with its estates, wherever appropriate, is using them as exemplars of the ways in which farming into the future can be maintained and enhanced in relatively extreme areas like the Staffordshire Moorlands. So I think for all those kinds of reasons, as well as the ones that have been expressed, and I do support the points that have been made by yourself, Chair, yeah, I think this is a really appropriate development.
Thank you very much. Any other members want to speak? In that case, I'm moving it. Well, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour of approving it on the terms outlined? Anyone against? That's unanimous. And we're now on to that's Worsley. Co-op in Bakewell. That's agenda item 12, and that's you again.
It is. Thank you, Chair. So this application is a site that I expect most members will be familiar with. It's located at the junction of Market Street and Granby Road in Bakewell town centre, and it is occupied currently by the Co-op as a convenience store with modest cafe. The signage is, for the most part, you'll see we go through for replacement of signage to update to reflect updated branding for the Co-op, with the addition of one further small sign. This plan does show an outline roughly where those signs will be positioned. So this is the main car park for the Co-op, and those familiar with the site will remember that this is sort of a run of pillars along the back of the building here, and there's some signage there which will be replaced. I'll show you some photographs in a moment. This is the main entrance to the premises, really, on the junction of Granby Road and Market Street. There'll be a replacement sign there, and there's a proposed hanging sign, effectively, or projecting sign just off the wall here. So that is the main entrance as existing, with the cooperative food branding along the top. And looking down Granby Road from that same corner, and looking the other way back towards Market Street from that same corner. And then a view from within the car park to where the signage currently is. You can see, as well as the cooperative food car park, there's also signage for the Insomnia Cafe as well. And this is the proposed signage. So this is the Co-op's most recent branding. So in this case, this is the main entrance elevation that I showed you in the photographs first. So the signage moves from being a longer run of letters here to being a shorter, slightly taller set of lettering, which is suspended on a bar between these two pillars of the building. And this shows the street elevation along Granby Road, and that's where the other sign would be positioned, the projecting sign, which I'll show you the elevation details of in a moment. And that's it, showing the signage on the corner from Market Street. And then this is the signage to the car park elevation. So again, you saw in the photograph that it had the cooperative food running along behind here. We've now got a smaller one. And this bar you can see above, this sign is externally illuminated. Adopted planning policy and design guidance doesn't support internally illuminated signage within the national park. However, external signage in commercial areas is acceptable. And you'll see in the report there's a recommendation of a condition that's only on during operating hours. So there you can see it superimposed onto the building. With this being an advertisement consent application, the only matters we can consider are those of highway safety and amenity. Amenity is clearly quite broad, but is generally interpreted to protect the visual amenities of the area. And that's something that we have to do in moderation. There's quite often signage where we perhaps might prefer a different colour, for instance, but we have to be careful that we're not making subjective judgments on these things and that we're considering the impact of them in their wider setting. Obviously, in this case, the area is a commercial area. There's signage along both Market Street to the right of this photograph and a lot along Granby Road to the left as well. In that context, we're comfortable with this amended signage, particularly as it does remove the existing signage that also runs along the stonework at the top here. And that's just a schematic of that same signage you can see is fixed to the stonework. And a section through just to show that it will project by about 60 millimetres plus fixings from the wall. And this is the car park elevation, and you can see the lighting trough proposed above that. That same lettering again. And this is the proposed projecting sign. Proportionally, they've not done themselves any real favours with that particular example because it's actually that stretches it. As you can see here, it's actually not projecting as far as that. This has been reduced in size since it was originally submitted. Our design guidance sets out maximum size for projecting signs. It was initially too large, but it's been reduced down to this, which is acceptable under our policies. So overall, our views are that this adds one additional sign to an area that has already quite heavily signed. We don't think that will affect the visual amenity of the area or the general appearance of the building itself. And for those reasons, the application is recommended for approval, Chair.
Right, thank you very much. I don't think we can complain about the colour, given our own advertisement liveries that we've got around the place. Andrew Hart.
Yeah, I can't see a problem with this, Chair. I'm going to move it.
Okay, that's seconded. Has anybody got any comments to make about it? No? Okay, all those in favour of approving it? Anyone against? That is carried unanimously. And the next item we have is Coal Pit Lane, Chelmorton. Have we got Mr. Swindale with us? We have? Yes, of course we have. Good. In that case, we're actually ahead of time, but this might take a long time. We'll try and get on with it. Right, this is you, Mark, again, isn't it?
It is indeed. Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the installation of 20 solar panel array at the rear of the house at the Old Vicarage in Chelmorton. The application site you can see in front of you here. The application site comprises a detached property here with a relatively large rear garden, which is located in the village of Chelmorton. It's a former vicarage. Until quite recently, it had been subdivided into two. It's now been taken back into use as a single dwelling. And it lies approximately 50 metres to the east of the covered reservoir, which you can see here, which is outside of ownership. And you'll see that structure more clearly in the site photographs as well. Land designated as natural zone for the purpose of the authority's local plan is located at roughly 100 metres north of the application site. And this is effectively the edge of Chelmorton village, and quickly extends into open moorland to the north. And the site is within the conservation area, as indeed is most of the land around the perimeter of the built form of Chalmorton Village. So here's a close view of the site. So sorry, I lost my cursor there. The property itself is here. Here's the covered reservoir, and the panels are proposed here. They're roughly 30 metres from the house. The overall length of this array is roughly 17 metres, and the total area covered would be about 3 metres deep. I should say, and it'll be apparent on the other plans, this is shown as a solid block. It would actually be 2 rows, so there would be effectively a small gap between them as you look at them from that point of view. So there you go. That gives you an idea of the layout. As I say, 17 metres long, a metre between them, and then each panel is just over a metre tall. So this shows the site looking back towards the garden. The house itself is down here, and quite helpfully, the area that you can see mowed here is roughly the position that the panels would be in. And that's looking back at it from the other direction. The covered reservoir is just out of sight to the bottom of this slope, just here. And there we go, you can see this is the covered reservoir area here, which is contained by this low stone wall. And so the panels are back at this position here. And this is looking further down. Again, this is the covered reservoir, so the panels are up here. And this is the front of the application property, and the panels in this view are set back up here. So in all of the views that I've just shown you from close to the property and from the passing roads, the panels wouldn't be seen. They would be entirely enclosed behind the application property itself, but behind other buildings around it as well. And the same is true of the main road through the village. You wouldn't appreciate the panels from there. As you'll have read in the report, our only grounds for concern on this particular application come from the impact of the panels when they're viewed from Church Lane, which I'll come on to show you next. So this is the approach from Church Lane. So you're looking towards the centre of Chalmorton Village here, which is the historic core and the oldest part of the village, and and still the conservation area as well, of course. You can just about see the church spire coming up through here as well. And the position of the panels is here. So that, if you can make it out on there, the grey line you can see there, this is the upper wall of the covered reservoir here. And so the panels would be seen here. Our concern is how removed this is from the remainder of the built form of the village, and the character of the panels in that landscape as it opens out to the moorland. It's very much a transitional parcel of land where the covered reservoir has a very low impact now, having effectively vegetated and been enclosed by the dry stone wall. And the panels would sit beyond this. In our view, they would have an adverse impact on both the character of the conservation area and the character of the landscape, as I say, as it opens out in that location. This is a much zoomed in photo, and I should stress that this isn't the distance at which you see them from Church Lane. This is simply to make the position shown on the previous photo clearer to members. I don't want to misrepresent that impact. But this is the area that the panels would be on again. And as I say, this is showing the separation from the built form in the village. And given the nature and character of the panels, our view is that that's harmful to both the historic character of the settlement and the rural character of the landscape that's established at that point. And for this reason, Chair, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I have a speaker, Mr. David Swindale. You've not been before us before, so if you'd like to move to the chair in front of you, and if you press the sort of long thing at the front, eventually that'll come on. Yes, that's right. And you're given 3 minutes to address us.
Out of the 3 key issues in the notes, it is only the landscape impact issue that has caused the recommendation to refuse this application. The Parish Council recommend approval due to the siting of the panels and state there is no issue in relation to the conservation area. Your officers give you the impression that Church Lane is a major route into the village. In reality, it's an unclassified rural road with less vehicular traffic than 1 car an hour coming down into the village The only people who walk down it are village dog walkers. Chelmorton is not a village that attracts tourists, and its appeal to us as residents is its peaceful nature. The panel location in our garden can be seen from Church Lane, but only part of the time, as there are trees and shrubs which obscure the view, and you would really need to stop to concentrate on seeing the panels. For those times when the garden can be seen, the panel location is well below the public footpath behind our house, and our mature trees screen the lower part of the low. So the transition from village to moorland is not affected by the proposed panels so much as the trees. If you drive down Church Lane, there are other distractions to look at, not just our garden, and in our view, to dismiss the benefits to the environment as being outweighed by a very small number of people possibly being offended by the sight of solar panels is incorrect. People may well welcome the sight of them as a sign that something is being done to challenge global warming. Your own policies state that even small-scale projects provide a valuable contribution to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. This application is supported by a neighbour who wrote in without our knowledge or prompting. It is welcomed by many who want to see the environmental benefits, as indeed does the government, who are committed to reducing reliance on fossil fuels completely by 2050. The panels can be mounted on a ground framework rather than bins, as previously discussed with your officer, and can be dealt with as a condition. A refusal will condemn us to use oil as a form of heating, which contributes to global warming and will ultimately affect the park detrimentally by the extreme weather events which will occur as a result.
You finished. Thank you very much indeed. I should have said thank you for letting us see your site yesterday. Right, members, we did do a site visit yesterday and I think we found it very instructive. Anybody wish to? Ginny?
Yes, when we looked at it yesterday, we were taking into consideration it was 2 blocks. And I think there was a suggestion made that maybe we could break those up so that it wasn't a solid mass of solar panels. They were broken into groups. Is that something that we could consider with some screening?
I'll let the officers come back on that. We've had a few more comments. Ken?
Thank you, Chair. I do think that this is a balanced judgment. I think that if we could look at that slide, Mark, the one from Church Lane. Thank you. And even the zoomed in one would, I think, want to look at it from the other end of the telescope, from one landscape perspective. There is a horizontality, a linearity of the wall around the reservoir, the roof lines of the houses beneath, that in fact the solar array would perpetuate. It would maintain that horizontal linearity, if that's an acceptable phrase. I think the point has been well made by Mr. Swindale that it's a narrow road, Church Lane. People driving down it, I think, are going to be more focused on the general view rather than the specific, and, one hopes, are concentrating on driving down that narrow lane. I think for me, if it was possible to ensure that the mounting of panels and their matte finish, so that we can reduce glare as much as possible, would make this a more attractive proposal than the recommendation for refusal. I think in the wider scheme of things, we have to acknowledge that we as an authority acknowledge the climate emergency, that we're striving ourselves to achieve net zero and are encouraging other people so to do, that our policies encourage this kind of initiative. And while I accept that we have to view each application on its own merit, and that if this was to be approved, it doesn't necessarily set a precedent for elsewhere, I think that on this occasion, the impact of the proposals would be sufficiently low for us to consider approving it rather than recommending it, than refusing it, Chair.
I'll second it, Chair.
Well, it's not been proposed yet, Kath. Okay, you put your hand up. What was?
Yes, I do want to speak, Chair. I don't know whether I should have declared it at the beginning, and we actually, where we live, we're amongst the first, if not the first, in the national park area to have PV tiles. And we had to build a building because we had a huge sycamore tree, well, we've still got it, outside our house, and the sun doesn't shine that much through sycamore trees. So we built a neat stone building to take the PV tiles. I am a great devotee of them, and I thought there was more harm done when I looked down from that farm, that house, and I looked downwards and I saw all those buildings, those barns that were derelict, and the state of them, something that wants doing about it, I'm sure. So I can't imagine that what is proposed here is going to have an adverse effect as bad as what they actually have to look at from their house. We're all being encouraged to look to the future, and this is one way we can help our environment, and I am happy to propose it, or second it if somebody else had proposed it before.
Andrew Hart?
Thank you.
You did put your hand up.
I did, yes. It reminds me of an application that we had this year
Yes.
for the 515 junction, the one that I have to traverse twice a day when I come to Peak Park. I'm too busy watching for the cars that are coming at 90 million miles an hour down the 515. This is the opposite side of this. This is a lane with very, very little traffic, very little foot traffic. I am, concerned that many people in the park don't have the space to put some panels.
Yeah.
This applicant has got some space to put some panels, and if he's got the 400 watt ones, then he's going to be producing about 8 kilowatts of power, which probably will be enough to heat his house. And we should really be encouraging people wherever possible to go for alternative energy. Once you've paid for the panels and set it all up, it pays for itself in a matter of time, especially with the climate crisis that we have at the moment and the cost of energy. We all know what happens every month when the energy bill drops through the letterbox. It's frightening. So I'm going to support this application. I think we ought to encourage where it's allowable within policy. It's a fine line, and I'm going to drop on the other side of the line. But I find myself agreeing with Ken.
Yes, I do too.
I don't know why.
Well put, Ken. Well put.
I don't know why members of this committee always say that when they find that's happening.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I mean, a word of caution. These panels extended across the national park would destroy the landscape. We've got to be extremely careful about it, and when we get a situation like this, we've got to get the best out of it that we can. And I got the impression from the site visits yesterday that members were sort of thought there was something that could be done here, and I think there was definitely a feeling that somewhere there's something that could be approved. I think the question that has to be asked before we actually plunge into it is whether there are things that can be done here that would soften what's being done. It's the point, perhaps, that Ginny was making. And could I have some advice on that, please?
It's actually quite difficult for me to give you that advice because I don't know what the technical constraints of the installation are in terms of breaking the blocks of panels. I would assume that if they're in 2 rows at the moment, they could be split the other way as well and positioned so that rather than looking at one larger mass of panels, you're actually looking at sort of 2 rows of 2 with a gap between, if you think that that would break the impact of them up. I don't know if the applicant has any more knowledge of that than I do.
We gave careful consideration to it. Originally, I thought we've got enough space, we can run it in one line, but actually we needed 50 metres across to get it in all in one line, and that meant it pushed it very much to the left. We're on virtually the extreme right area that we can, and pushing it across to the left, actually we would get shading from the western boundary late in, particularly in the winter, but also later in the afternoon. And the view was that it was easier to go for 2 rows rather than try and get it into one.
Okay, I understand that argument. Are you happy with that, Jenny? I think the other thought that came out in the discussions that we had yesterday, by the way, we stood on the top of the hill on Church Lane looking down, and 4 vehicles came past us, not 1 an hour, 4 vehicles came past us.
But those 4 vehicles were going up out of the village, not coming down. And when you're going up, you don't look in the rear mirror to see the panels.
I always go down when I'm taking my car to be serviced. Sorry, yes. I'm just going to just ask a question first, because I'm going to follow on from that. The point that came out on the site visit yesterday was whether there's any low-level planting that can be done to soften it, which I think is the point that Mark was referring to. Have you considered that?
We have considered it. A lot of thought has gone into this at all. One idea was to move the panels closer to the wall, which we can't do because we've got a restriction. We've got to be at least 12 feet from the wall for legal reasons. But also, the idea of putting the panels there is so that they can see the sun. If you put low level, and we're thinking of putting the panels virtually at ground level, if you put planting in front of it, then you obscure the panels and defeat the object.
Okay. Mike Chaplin.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to return to Ken's point about reducing glare by having the kind of panels that effectively have a matte finish rather than a shiny finish that would cause glare in certain circumstances.
Can you help us with that, Mark? I mean, I'm sort of assuming that they would be anti-glare anyway, but...
As a matter of course, I'm not sure that panels are, but certainly there are panels with that matte finish available. So that would be something we could secure by condition, I'd suggest.
That's something you could secure by condition. I suppose I better ask the applicant, are the panels matte finished? Will they shine? Will they...
Simple answer to that is I don't know. But
Okay.
if we can get matte panels, then we would use them.
Well, it sounds as if the direction that we're going in is you're going to end up with matte panels. So, so we'll work that out as we go along. Right, we have a proposer and seconder, but what we haven't got is conditions. So perhaps you would just suggest some conditions and then we'll see whether those are acceptable and we'll move on.
Of course. So, first of all, the standard time limit for implementation of the development of 3 years. To adopt the submitted plans, to secure a matte finish for the panels, to install them parallel to the ground, as the applicant has suggested there, they would look to do. As submitted, the specifications suggest that they would be in on a stand effectively, but a ground-mounted stand, but they would be 15 degrees up from the profile of the hill, which would obviously increase their prominence, whereas 15 degrees from the ground, from level, would put them flat. So I would suggest that we look to secure them parallel to the ground as the applicant has offered, and for them to be removed when they're no longer required for the purposes of energy generation.
Okay, I understand that. Are those conditions acceptable to the mover and seconder? I think those are perfectly reasonable conditions, Kat. Those are perfectly reasonable conditions. Good day. Well, on that basis, I'm going to put it to the vote. All those in favour of approving this, subject to those conditions? Anyone against? No, that is carried. Right. Thank you very much for your help with this.
Thank you.
Right, I've got application for Whole Farm Elkstones Longner, Mr. and Mrs. Howard. Well, we will do in a minute's time, so should we do it now instead? Yeah, okay. All those in favour of going past the allotted hour? Anyone against? No, that's okay. That's carried, and we will deal with Elkstones.
Thank you, Chair. So the application here is for a proposed rear extension to a whole farm at Elkstones. The application site is a non-working farm lying in open countryside in the upland pastures of the Southwest Peak. It's approximately 500 metres to the south of Lower Elkston. The property is not listed, but it is considered to be a non-designated heritage asset, being recorded on the Historic Buildings, Sites and Monuments record, where it's described as a farmstead that existed by the late 19th century, and it has a linear plan with additional detached outbuildings. So here we go. So if I show you the existing, sorry, I've lost my cursor. So this plan shows both the existing and the proposed rear of the building. So and how clearly you can see that, the dotted line at distance, it's not too bad. That's the extent of the existing rear projection, which you'll see on the photographs more clearly. And the grey shaded area is the footprint of the proposed extension. The access to the site, incidentally, is from this side. So this is the principal elevation of the building here, and this is the rear. So this shows the property. As you can see, it is a traditional farmhouse with converted barn or shipping to this end. This elevation is largely unaltered, I would suggest, and retains a lot of traditional character. And this is the rear from taken down in the rear garden. You can see there have been alterations to this side. Notably, you have a two-storey projecting gable at the rear here, one of a modest projection, and then a lean-to or a cat-slide roof continuing from the roof of the main property, which doesn't project beyond the line of this gable here, and has some contemporary detailing in terms of the glazing there, but nevertheless reflects the general form and linearity of the property. And there's another view of that which shows the existing arrangement a bit more clearly. And this is it from the other angle. So this is the two-storey rear gable. You can see this in itself has been altered. In relatively recent times, this was actually a narrower gable, which was extended in width, which actually probably improves its proportions relative to that of the main building. And then this is the cat slide coming off here with a slightly unusual roof-like detail that wraps around the corner here, but is otherwise solid in form and reflective of the parent building in terms of its detailing. So this shows the existing floor plan. At the moment, you've got a sitting room that runs through into a kitchen and a garden room here. So that was where you saw the contemporary glazing in the end. And then this is the two-storey gable that's already built off the back. And there's your existing roof form as well. So this is your two-storey element, and this is the cat slide or lean-to. And this is as proposed. So you can see the projection forward of the existing two-storey gable is quite considerable, and the garden room area becomes extended as well. So the space internally is actually the same rooms, but they all become larger. And so this element here, as you'll see in the elevations, is flat roofed, and the projection here is roughly 4.5 metres, and the projection of this gable, which is a pitched roof you'll see in the elevations, is 6.75 metres. So this is the existing elevations from the side and the other side and the rear. And now you can see the proposed roof plan, which obviously matches with the floor plan you've just seen. So this is the flat roof section that I mentioned with a lantern in and a zinc roof, and the projecting gable here. And you can see this is the proposed side elevation. So this is the current extent of the building line here, and this would project out beyond that. And the other elevation with the zinc roof. So this is the new section here. The eaves and the ridge are lower than that of the parent building, albeit they're higher than you'd expect typically from a single story extension in that position. And then this is the rear. So you can see that you end up with an arrangement of roofs of different types, gables of different widths, different eaves heights, different ridge heights. And that is something else entirely, so I'll go back. So in terms of the merits of the proposal, the proposed extension introduces a complexity of form to the rear elevation of the existing property, and the result is a rear elevation of confused and complex design. This isn't reflective of the local vernacular building tradition of simplicity of form, and complicates a building that has already been extended. The proposed extension is single storey, but the eaves and ridge height are almost as high as the eaves and ridge height of the existing two-storey extension. And this element of the extension is therefore not read as a single storey extension, but it further complicates the interpretation of the building to that side. The proposed flat roof element of the extension doesn't relate well to the gabled element, each being of a different design with different eaves heights. And as a whole, the rear elevation of the property as proposed would have 3 projecting elements, each with a different eaves and ridge height, and there'd be no coherence in design or simplicity of form. The proposed extension would project further from the property than both the existing two-storey rear extension and the existing single-storey extension to this side as well. And as such, the proposal undermines the established linear form of the property, which is best appreciated in the side elevations. If we accept, of course, this is the main building and the linear form is running towards you effectively there, by projecting off by a significantly greater distance than the original gable, that linearity of form is lost, and that's a key part of the building's character. So overall, the proposed extension, its design, form and massing and scale would not conserve or enhance the character, appearance, setting or significance of the non-designated heritage asset. Based on historic mapping, it is accepted that at some point there was most likely an L-shaped configuration of buildings at the site, but it remains unclear if this was the building's original layout, and indeed the mapping provided by the applicant differs somewhat from the mapping the authority has on record in terms of the position and layout of that. In addition, of course, we have no idea of what any extension or buildings in that position comprised, and whether indeed they were original. Limited weights therefore will be given to any historic L-shaped arrangement of the buildings, because it's not known what permanence, scale, massing or design any former buildings projecting from the rear of the property was, and any efforts at reinstatement would therefore be largely conjectural, as well as remaining at odds with the building's current form. Therefore, for the reasons stated, the application is recommended for refusal, Chair. Thank you.
And really, whatever the historic situation is, we've got to deal with it as it is now anyway. Yeah, okay. We have a statement to be read by Dem Services. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. This is a statement from Mr and Mrs Howard, the applicant for Hull Farm, Elkstone. The current application follows a previous application which was refused. The scheme in front of you being the result of over 3 months of collaboration with the planning officer, Steve Coombs, to find an acceptable proposal. We appreciate the time that Steve spent getting to this point, engaging proactively with us as required by NPPF. While accepting that having not been party to these discussions, the current officer is now going to be fully aware of the reasons that have led to this current design. We would like to make the following points that support the proposals to extend and that the application should be supported. First, historically the evidence confirms, as does the officer's report, that the building has been altered, extended, added to, etc. over its lifetime. Secondly, an extension must be possible. Otherwise, why would Steve waste his time discussing a revised scheme for 3 months? Indeed, his final email of 20th of April suggests he is very happy with the proposals, subject to a few minor tweaks. Thirdly, clearly the interpretation of the policies is subjective. We have a scheme now that one officer was happy with and advised we submit, while the officer looking at it disagrees, stating that the first scheme, in particular the roof plan, was more appropriate. So both officers supporting an extension, albeit of slightly different design. Fourth, at the end of the day, as a non-designated heritage asset, the applicant could choose to significantly alter the internal layout, removing walls, changing floor heights, etc., effectively obliterating the historic plan without any approval needed. The applicant have decided not to do this. Instead, they have tried to extend a previous extension and add the space they need for eating, family gatherings, etc., while retaining the veracity of the existing historic plan. An extension which has been amended to, that it has received no objections or comment from anyone, including the PDMPA archaeologists, who did object to the first scheme, and also the parish council, who now supports the proposals, having had no comment on the previous scheme. So again, showing that the scheme, as it would appear, improved and is potentially acceptable. So our question is, where do we go from here? When we appear so close, is the only option really a refusal and then an appeal? Is there not a better option? Thank you.
Well, I don't know the answer to that last question. Have any members got any thoughts on this? Andrew Hart, Ken Smith.
Yeah, disappointed that there's this confusion, and I'm wondering where the confusion's coming from. I look at that design. I personally don't think it's appropriate, but I'd be very interested in how we got to this stage, having had 3 months of consultation. Remember me saying about some houses are improved with extensions. Well, this one isn't with this particular one, and I think that the applicants need some help to get a definite course of action for the future. They obviously do need a requirement for the extra space. It's how they achieve it. I am concerned a little bit because key issues, consideration are the principle of the development. And then one further down, impact on highways safety. They're a long way away from the highway. I really can't see that there's any highway considerations there. And then it says impact upon residential amenity of neighbouring occupiers. Looking at the plan, there isn't any near neighbours for perhaps a couple of 100 yards, maybe more. I can't read this plan particularly well, but it's quite a distance between them and the next house. And I'd like to know what the impact would be on the nearest property as far as visual amenity is concerned. How far away is that nearest property? So there's 3 things out of the key issues that I'm a little bit concerned about.
Can I come back, Chair?
Could possibly somebody answer those questions for me, please, Chair?
I think Mark is determined to answer those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to answer perhaps the last question, I think it was first. The nearest neighbouring properties are 400 metres to the northeast, 380 metres to the 400 metres to the northwest, 380 to the northeast, and 600 to the east. So clearly, we're talking considerable distances here. In terms of the key issues, I have to concede that I think those have largely been listed as those that we would typically consider on any householder planning application. The principle of the development is obviously something that's always key to establish on any development before we start looking at the detail. So I think it's right to include that. I would agree that the highway and amenity issues, which are addressed in the report, are perhaps not key issues for this particular application, but they both have acceptable impact.
I think
we've had three months of consultation on this, and it's been confusing, and I'd like to know how we've got to this stage.
I think that's an issue, but I don't. And I'm going to ask the officers to look at this afterwards because we can't answer it now. But I think what we need to look at is where we are now. Actually, one of the things that doesn't appear in this report is why all of these extensions are necessary. I mean, I don't know whether there's an issue or whether it's just a whim or a wanting to do.
I don't think that we have that information either, and obviously it's not a requirement for an extension to a house that somebody justifies it to us necessarily.
It seems to me that the officer advice on the design here is absolutely dead on. It is a bit of a mishmash of shapes and slopes and all sorts of things. And I'm not saying that they can't have an extension. I just don't believe this necessarily has to be it. I'm going to move this for refusal on the ground set out in the report. Michael, you're seconding that, are you?
I did want to just say, if I may, in support of supporting your moving the recommendation, that with properties like this, there does come a point beyond which extensions just are no longer appropriate. I take the point that Mark made that the extension to the gable on that bit of the L did balance up some of the building, and that the cat slide roof element is appropriate in the context of that building. But I think my point would be that beyond that, with what is being proposed, it's a step too far. There may well be ways of extending those buildings, but I just don't think that this is the way, which is why I'm second.
Okay. And Mike, you wanted to speak?
Well, Ken stolen my thunder. I couldn't agree more. Just to use a phrase that was mentioned in relation to another one, although there's disagreement over that, then the building starts to look higgledy-piggledy, and it loses its it loses its character. And this clearly does have a lot of history to it, being a it is, I believe, a non-designated heritage asset.
We can make that decision that it is, yes. Right, so it's, well, it's been seconded actually, so we're now at the point where if any other members want to speak on it, in that case I'll put it to the vote, which is that it be refused for the grounds set out in the report. All those in favour of that motion? Anyone against? One against. Okay, that is refused, and we're now on to the planning enforcement report, which on your programme is at 1:30, but I have managed to get the message out that we are going to start a bit earlier, and I'm pleased to see that some people are here able to catch up with it. So, Andrew Cook, would you come and join us, please? I suppose I should ask members, are you happy to carry on now, or do you want a 5-minute break? Carry on, good. Right, Andrew?
Get myself ready. I've got myself right in front of the screen. Good afternoon, members. This is the quarterly monitoring enforcement report, so it covers the quarter that's just finished at the end of June, so April, May and June, and summarises the what we've been up to in that quarter. Not a great deal to say on the report, but there's just a few things I wanted to draw your attention to. The first one is pertinent to the photograph that's up on the screen. So this is the site at Cresbrookdale, land at Cresbrookdale, where we've issued an enforcement notice, as stated in the report at paragraph 5. So this enforcement notice was issued on the 6th of April. I think the committee in April, which I attended for the last report, was just after that date, so I did verbally update the committee that the enforcement notice had been issued. But I've got a bit more detail in the photographs now to show you. So the enforcement notice relates to a number of developments on the site, one of which you can see in the photograph. So it relates to the TP, which we have alleged is a building, mainly because it's been in situ for some time. It's been there for about a year now. It's involves some ground preparation to accommodate the building, and it's also of a considerable size. So for those reasons, we've alleged it's a building in the enforcement notice. The notice also includes the path that you can see that leads down to the building, down to the TP, which we have alleged to be an engineering operation because it has involved some excavation and groundwork. That's just another photograph just to show a bit more of the setting of the path down to the... This is taken from the public footpath, by the way. So you can see that it is very visible from the public footpath. So you can obviously see the TP there with the path leading down to it. This is virtually on the public footpath. Again, the photograph is taken on the public footpath, and you can see the public footpath sort of to the left-hand side of the photograph, running away from us there. And just to the right of the footpath, you can see the hard-standing parking area, which has been constructed, which is also covered by the enforcement notice. And then finally, this is again on the public footpath. So these steps have been constructed on the public footpath itself. You can see that some of them have already failed. These photographs were taken a little while ago, as you can see from the foliage. It's not summer, but some of the steps had been sort of washed away and been damaged. Just again another photograph showing the closer up photograph showing the steps. So the enforcement notice, as I say, was issued on the 6th of April. There was no appeal against the enforcement notice. So the notice came into effect on the 22nd of May. And the compliance dates, there are two sets of compliance dates. The first set are to remove the developments, and the date given is 22nd of August this year. And second set is to reinstate the land that's been disturbed by the developments, and the period given there is up until the 22nd of November. So obviously those dates have not yet passed, but as far as we're aware, there's been no attempt so far to comply with the enforcement notice. We are aware that there are other issues on the site. Notably, we've had reports of a caravan which has been on the site for some time, and also a vehicle, sort of converted horse box, horse transporter, which is alleged to be being used for residential purposes. And all the evidence suggests that's the case. We're currently gathering the evidence as far as we can in relation to that. We're just about to issue a planning contravention notice, hopefully next week, which will seek information from the landowners and from the occupier as to exactly what's happening. It's quite likely, given past experience on this site, that the planning contravention notice won't be returned. but we feel it's to the benefit of potential future action to at least give the owners the opportunity to provide that information. If they choose not to, then we will act on the information that we've got. So that's Cresbrook Dale. Sorry, I should have said, well, moving on to the second page of the report, in paragraph 9, or just after paragraph 9, I should say, there's a table. There's just a correction to make on the third column, the final column of that table. It's one of the perils of cutting and pasting, I'm afraid, from the previous report. So it should say outstanding at the end of the quarter, not at the end of the year, not at year end. And the figure, the first figure there, inquiries outstanding at the end of the quarter, in that same column, the figures are the wrong way round. So basically the number currently is 232, whereas the number at the end of the last quarter or the end of last year was 243. So I just wanted to make that correction.
Does the same happen with the breaches?
No, everything else is okay. Yeah. So just briefly, in terms of the figures, I'm pleased to say that the figures are more encouraging in terms of performance. So we've closed 37 enforcement cases, so 37 cases where the breaches have been closed in the quarter, which is against a target of 120 for the year. To put that in context, the whole of last year we only closed 70 cases, so we're already just over halfway towards that in the first quarter. So hopefully that performance will stay on that sort of track. Also, in terms of our investigation of inquiries, in the last year, this is in paragraph 8 of the report, over the last year, so the previous year, we investigated only 41% within 30 working days, which was well short of the target of 80%. But we are on the right track now. We've risen to 50%, obviously still well below the target, but we are moving in the right direction, so that's encouraging. On the following pages, you'll see, as usual, that there's a list of the cases that have been closed in this quarter, and I've just got a couple of cases. I wanted to show you some photographs, before and after photographs. So this is a lorry body that was sighted on agricultural land near Butterton. On the list, it's the fourth one from the bottom of the list. Sighting of former lorry body, land west of B5053, Butterton Moor. So this was placed on agricultural land. Obviously it's extremely unattractive, right next to the road, causing significant damage to the appearance of the landscape, but that's now been removed. So that's a really good result. And secondly, this is an interesting case. It was originally, it's about a mile west of Hollingsclough, so it's in a fairly remote location. It's an outbuilding about 20 metres away from the main dwelling. And it was, when it first came to our attention, it was raised with us because essentially the outbuilding had been extended, and you can see the extension there. It's the whole of that blockwork part of the building. That was extended and converted to essentially a self-contained dwelling, all without planning permission. And when it was reported to us, we investigated it as per normal, and the the outcome was that the building, the extension itself, had been in place for more than 4 years. So for that reason, we couldn't take any enforcement action. It was immune from enforcement action. But the use of the building as a dwelling was not immune, because the periods are different for uses as opposed to built development. So that's how it started off as an enforcement case. We created a case for that reason. We then had a planning application for the conversion of the building, so it's a retrospective application to regularise the use of the building and to retain the extension. That was eventually approved, but there were improvements to the building approved as part of that consent. So the issue since then has been to actually get those improvements done. So it involved cladding of the building and replacing the windows with something more appropriate. And now we've got that. So they have now clad the building as approved, and they've inserted the windows that were approved as part of that scheme. It's an unusual one, but you know, we've now achieved, I think you'll agree, a better appearance to the building than was the case previously. So that is again another case that's been closed because the conditions of that consent have now been complied with. That's everything I wanted to draw attention to, so that's me, thank you.
Right, thank you, Andrew. First of all, one of the things I noticed on this report was the much longer list of breaches resolved than we had at the last meeting, so well done on that. It's a year actually ago that we first sort of established this figure in paragraph 9 on the number of breaches outstanding, and we still have to address that huge list of cases. Just to assure members, there have been meetings involving me, Ken, Brian, Andrew and the Chief Exec to try and get a handle on this, because we have got a significant problem with planning enforcement. There is certainly a temporary resource issue. This authority is not immune from the pressures that are happening across the country in terms of finding people to do jobs. I mean, whether you're trying to see a doctor or whether you're trying to get a drink served in a pub or all sorts of things, everywhere we go now, there are places where there are not enough people to do the jobs available, and this planning enforcement service is not immune from that, nor indeed is the rest of the planning service. But there has been a broad plan drawn up to try and get to grips not just with the day-to-day turnover, which is the inquiries part of that table, but with also drawing up the backlog. It will mean, without any shadow of a doubt, it will mean that we're going to have to prioritise in a different way. There will be very old cases amongst this lot that, frankly, if they have not been dealt with by now, probably are no longer either worth pursuing or causing us a problem. We're going to have to write off some old cases, simply so that we can clear the backlog and concentrate on what we've got now. It's a bit like driving a car. You're going in one direction, and you suddenly decide you should have been going the other way. And you have to stop. You have to do a 3-point turn, or in some people's cases, 15-point turn. And then you have to go back the other way. And it takes time to do that turnaround, and that's what we're having to do. And we're having to do it across the whole authority. We've got a big report coming up to us at the end of July on the restructuring proposals. That is all part of this process of trying to get the resources and the expertise and everything else we need to do on a much more limited budget than we ever had before, relatively at least, the job that needs doing. And it does require us as members to be supportive of that process, and it does require us all to be a bit patient. We have to look at priorities, and we have to make sure that those things that really matter get dealt with first, and then we have to deal with the other things as resources allow. And this is for the staff that are involved. It's a jolly difficult job. You're dealing with some very difficult people from time to time, and they do need, we do need to be patient sometimes with some of the things that need doing. I think we're heading in the right direction. We will know much better over the next few months as we start making decisions as an authority about the future structure of the planning department, the people who are going to fill posts, because there are quite a lot of empty posts of one sort or another, including one, hopefully, that will be at a very high level. So we're looking at all the management things that need to be done. We're going to look at the way in which we keep enforcement records to see whether IT can help us, and so on and so forth. There's a lot going on. But this report has been made against that background, and I think it is showing some signs of progress. Thank you very much. And we will see how things develop over the next few months. But it is going to require a steady hand. We can't panic over it. Members, have you got any things you wish to raise on this report from Andrew? No? You're going to move the recommendation. I'm going to second that recommendation. Has anybody got anything else to add? No. Thank you very much indeed. The next item on the agenda is... Oh, sorry. I just took it for granted. I'm getting tired. It's 1:30. I haven't had my lunch. All those in favour of noting the report? Those against? Right. I shall find things to correct you on. The last item on the agenda is agenda item 16, the planning appeals monthly, as it were. 2 new appeals, 1 committee, 1 delegated, and a planning decision notice. I don't remember this one, the telegraph poll, but anyway, there we are. Anybody got any questions on this report? Would Kenneth like to propose that it be approved?
Patrick, I would be delighted.
All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. And got it for 1:30. Actually, that's because one item was pulled off the agenda. Yeah, okay. We could even say we did catch up. Right, I'm tired now. I don't think I want to go through anymore. I'll ring you up sometime, and we'll have a... there's nothing to follow up on, is there? I don't think so. No. No, okay. Yeah, thank you.